Chapter 4509. You! Suji was a little skeptical and asked, "What other magical powers do you have?" This is the Star Moon Palace. Let me try first," Xiaohua said with a smile. "If I can do it, you don't have to waste. Extend thought." The corners of Suji's mouth curled into a faint smile as he said in a gratified manner, "All right, you can try first." As he spoke, Suji withdrew his extend thought and looked at Xiaohua kindly. Even Fairy Xingyu had a grateful smile in her eyes. Xiaohua nodded slightly at the two immortals. He raised his hand and patted his forehead, opening his delusion breaker eye again. Seeing a green shadow flashing between Xiaohua's eyebrows, Suji and Fairy Xingyu looked at each other with a strange look in their eyes. Xiaohua opened his eyes, and everything in front of him changed again. What starry sky, what meteor belt, they all disappeared. In front of him was an incomparably huge space, and the space was filled with countless fragments of different splendors. These fragments seemed like dust, and also like crushed stones, floating in the countless fine lines that seemed like flowing water. The fragments were similar to the space fragments that Xiaohua had seen with his naked eye, but they were much smaller. As for whether each fragment was a continent or an ocean, Xiaohua's delusion breaker eye could not tell. As for the fine lines, they flowed at an extremely fast speed and were entangled with each other. Some fine lines even rushed into the fragments and shattered them. Not only were the brilliance of these fine lines different, but their thickness was also different. Some were as thin as hair, and some were as thick as threads. However, hundreds of millions of fine lines enveloped the entire space. In front of Xiaohua's eyes there was a thin mist-like golden light that protected Xiaohua and the others. There were some strange runes in the golden light. These runes were like fine lines of light, and within the fine lines of light smaller runes were engraved. This golden light covered the sky and the earth, separating it from the fine lines like flowing water in an orderly manner. Even in the distance of the meteor belt, it looked like the runes were also paved with golden light. Xiaohua looked around. The fine lines of the flowing water seemed to have no source and no end. On his left and right, two dim silvery white human-shaped lights flashed slightly. Xiaohua naturally knew that this silver-white humanoid brilliance was Suji and Fairy Xingyu. Therefore, he only glanced at them from the corner of his eye. He did not dare to look at them for too long. Then, he focused his delirium dharma eye on the fine lines of the water flow. After looking at it carefully for a moment, Xiaohua had an idea in his heart. Just as Suji said, the fine lines were slowly slowing down. Moreover, the collisions between the different colored fine lines were starting to lessen. Xiaohua could even see a slightly chaotic order in the fine lines before his eyes. Seeing the delusion breaker dharma eye on Xiaohua's forehead disappear, Suji asked with some concern, "How is it? Your divine art didn't suffer any backlash from the meteor belt, right?" Xiaohua's heart warmed slightly. This kind of adventure was a true adventure. There was no need to worry about being tricked by others. If there was some danger, others would even block it for you. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Senior, you should know that this divine ability of mine usually won't backfire." "Well, what did you see?" Unlike Suji, Fairy Xingyu urged. "Can you see the passage they flew through?" Xiaohua shook his head and said, "There is no passage in this meteor belt. We can only rush through it slowly like what you said just now." "Oh," Fairy Xingyu responded with some disappointment. "However, I saw that these different auras are slowing down. Moreover, there is a certain order between the auras," Xiaohua said again. A strange look flashed across Suji's eyes as he whispered, "Your divine art. Is it the Buddha's heavenly eye?" "Well, it's somewhat similar." Xiaohua didn't hide it and replied. "However, there is also a big difference. My Dharma eye is much more powerful than heavenly eye." "You're just bluffing." Fairy Xingyu didn't believe him. "Also," Xiaohua pointed to the two sides and asked, "Is there no other place that is easy to pass through?" "Actually, there are other pavilions in this meteor belt that we can go to," Suji explained. However, those pavilions require some strange tokens. Fairy Xingyu and I didn't find any, so we can't enter those pavilions. On the other side of this meteor belt, there are some places that don't require tokens. In particular, there is one place that might be the passage, so we have to go through there. When Su Ji and I first came here, we spent most of our time in this meteor belt, so we know the situation on the other side of this meteor belt the best. Fairy Xingyu added. This meteor belt is almost endless. Even with our ability, we can't find the end of it. In the nearby hundreds of thousands of miles, only this place has a relatively weak aura. There are also times when it has a lull. The other places are like rivers, and the auras of the various realms are like waves, never calming down. We can't pass through at all. Senior, you must have tried other methods. Xiaohua probed. Were they all ineffective? Yes. Su Ji nodded. After finding a pavilion with a strong immortal spiritual aura, we were a little impatient when we entered. When we passed through this meteor belt, we tried to use the flowing cloud bridge of the immortal realm. Not only did it not bring us to the other side of the meteor belt, but it also almost destroyed my physical body at that time. Senior, can you protect me? Xiaohua pondered for a moment and asked. What do you want to do? Su Ji frowned. Since we're here, don't fail at the last step. Why don't you wait for a while? Junior will try. Xiaohua smiled. If it works, not only will Senior have more confidence, but Junior will also have more means to protect my life in this Star Moon Palace. It's better not to try. Su Ji's concern was like facing his own junior. He said, Fairy Xingyu and I didn't tell you the details of the Star Moon Palace because we were afraid that you would have your own ideas and inevitably use your own methods. You just need to follow behind us and contribute when it's time. Junior will try. Xiaohua still refused to give up. If there's anything unusual about this meteor belt, Senior only needs to block the backlash of the meteor belt. Presumably, Senior already has some experience, right? Su Ji was a little unhappy. He glanced at Xiaohua and said, Have you really decided? Yes. Junior wants to try. Xiaohua nodded affirmatively. Well, you can cast the spell. Su Ji agreed. If there's anything unusual, I'll block the backlash for you. However, the backlash of this meteor belt is very strange. I'm not sure if I can block it. You have to be careful too. Okay. Xiaohua responded. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the soul silk between his eyebrows rushed out. In an instant, a ghostly chanting sound came from the soul silk. One by one, green seal characters flew out from between his eyebrows and quickly separated and combined in midair. Shaman! Fairy Xingyu opened her mouth, her eyes filled with horror. Su Ji's expression also changed drastically. Before Su Ji could stop Xiaohua, he saw the green seal text land in the sky of the meteor belt. A tumbling teleportation channel slowly appeared, and within the teleportation channel, the green seal text swarmed towards the opposite side of the meteor belt. However, just as this technique passed through the golden light that Xiaohua's delusion breaker eye could see, the runes in the golden light immediately transformed into a long spear that was several feet long. It let out a sharp whistle and crazily rushed into the green seal text. Pa! With a loud sound, the green seal text of the word, transmit, completely collapsed. The transmission channel that had just been formed also collapsed from the inside out. When the transmission channel turned into hundreds of small green seal characters, more golden runes once again turned into thumb-sized spears and pierced into the smaller green seal characters. Pa pa pa! More rumbling sounds were heard until all the green seal characters were destroyed. Not only that, when the green seal characters disappeared, the golden light condensed into a spear several feet long and pierced toward Xiaohua's eyebrows like lightning and thunder. Get out of the way! Although Su Ji couldn't see the spear condensed from the golden light, he could feel the recoil of the meteor belt. Seeing that the attack was even more powerful than the one he had encountered before, Su Ji shouted loudly, and his figure was about to block in front of Xiaohua. No need! Xiaohua felt a strong wind coming from between his eyebrows. Even his delusion breaker eye seemed to be blown apart by this strong wind. Xiaohua hurriedly shouted, "We'll just use the thunder technique to block this attack." As he spoke, lightning surged around Xiaohua's body. Four-colored lightning shot out from his hand and pounced on the spear-shaped runes. Okay. Su Ji didn't dare to be careless. His hands formed seals, and two water-blue lightning passed through the space and merged with Xiaohua's four-colored lightning. Bang! With a loud bang, the five-colored lightning was smashed into powder. The spear condensed by the golden runes didn't collapse, but its sharpness was already reduced by 60%. Xiaohua's figure flashed, and in an instant, the spear didn't even touch his shadow. Bang! Not far behind Xiaohua, the starry sky was destroyed by the invisible spear, and a huge black hole appeared. A strong suction force came from the black hole, sucking in the nearby fluctuations and aura. Xiaohua and the others were slightly shocked. They each used their magical powers to teleport away, avoiding the suction force of the black hole. After a few minutes, the black hole slowly disappeared, and Xiaohua flew back. "How was it?" Su Ji asked. "Have you given up?" "Yes, I know." Xiaohua nodded. He had really given up. It seemed that the soul cultivation technique, which had always been successful, had lost its former power in the Star Moon Palace built in ancient times. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, "Su Ji, Xiaohua is doing this out of kindness. He just wants to save us some trouble. He's just trying to be brave and competitive." Xiaohua smiled faintly and didn't admit it. Su Ji glanced at Xiaohua with a cold expression. He then looked at Fairy Xingyu and said, "I haven't been a judge for many years. I'm no longer as cold-blooded as before. Furthermore, I was once an ordinary mortal. Naturally, I can see these things as well." Chapter 45:10. After that, Su Ji looked at Xiaohua again and said earnestly, "Xiaohua, have you forgotten? Xingyu and I have already warned you. Some magical powers should not be revealed in front of others. Did you take it as a passing wind? Although we don't understand the magical power you just used, how can we not know what it is? Taboo power is the most taboo power in the immortal world. As long as there is a taboo power, the celestial venerables will hunt it down and eliminate it. I know you trust us, but we don't dare to trust ourselves. Who knows what kind of interrogation we will encounter when we return to the immortal world? Even if it's a soul search, it's normal. We can't guarantee that we won't reveal your secret. If this matter brings disaster to you, then you can only blame yourself." Su Ji's words were very strict, but they were sincere. Xiaohua seemed to see another helpless person standing in front of him and berating him. He straightened his face, bowed, and said, "Yes, I understand. Thank you for your reminder, Senior. In this world, there is no one you can absolutely trust." The coldness on Su Ji's face lessened slightly, and he said, "It's just that the price of betrayal is different. If the price is high enough, some people may even abandon the realm that gave birth to them. Yes, I've learned my lesson." Xiaohua, of course, knew the care in Su Ji's words. He didn't dare to straighten his back and answered respectfully, "It's good that you know. You're just too." Su Ji hesitated and stopped. He looked at the chaotic realm, and the aura gradually calmed down. He said, "Forget it, let's not talk about this. The meteor belt seems to have changed. Let's wait a little longer." "Okay," Xiaohua agreed. In fact, he opened his illusion breaker eyes again and carefully observed the meteor belt. Fairy Xingyu watched Su Ji berate Xiaohua from the side. Her eyes showed a trace of confusion and a trace of complexity. At this time, the Xingyu Palace had begun to bustle. Other than the four aristocratic families and some of the Confucian cultivators rushing to the meteor belt, the other Confucian cultivators and great demons of the demon clan also went to other places in the Xingyu Palace. There were no traces of people outside the Xingyu Palace. When the Xingyu Palace moved again, even the starlight passage between the gate and the thousand demons' sacred realm could not hold on. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The entire starlight passage completely collapsed, and the passage was completely filled with chaotic storms. In just a moment, the starlight disappeared, and a powerful whirlwind in the interspace. The whirlwind blew out of the interlayer, scattering the power of the stars and the moon in the sky. Without the starlight passage, the Shinue Palace began to move faster. In the time it took to eat a meal, the huge aura within hundreds of thousands of miles was concealed in the void again. Boom! The moment the aura disappeared, the Chidi River, which had been split open by the Shinue Palace, let out a violent roar, and the river surged again. Furthermore, at the spot where the Shinue Palace had disappeared, the space within hundreds of thousands of miles seemed to have suddenly become completely empty. Endless chi of heaven and earth and noble chi surged in, forming a rare hurricane. Not only did the hurricane cause the wind and clouds to sway in the sky, but it also caused the Chidi River to surge with red waves. The waves surged violently, and the nearby mountain ranges were blown into flying sand and rolling stones, causing the forest to collapse. The previously bright starry sky was gone, and the hook-like crescent moon was even more desolate. Occasionally it would appear in the gaps of the dark clouds. The moonlight was also scattered by the strong wind. The Shinue Palace appeared and disappeared again. It was unknown where it would appear again, and when it would appear again. "Senior!" Xiaohua observed for a moment in front of the meteor belt and whispered. "It's about time. I feel that the aura in this area has begun to calm down. If I'm not wrong, I've found some patterns." Suji nodded. "It's similar to my perception, but I'm not sure. Tell me, which spatial fragment should we fly to?" Xiaohua explained. "Senior, I don't know which spatial fragment to fly to, but I know which spatial fragment has a stable aura." "I understand." Fairy Xingyuan nodded. "According to our previous experience, there are currently 6 spatial fragments that we can enter. If there are other disciples, we will split into 6 groups and enter separately. Now that you can determine the stability of the spatial fragments, we don't have to test them one by one." "Which 6 spatial fragments?" Xiaohua asked hurriedly. Fairy Xingyue raised her hand and pointed. She did not point at the few spatial fragments closest to Xiaohua and the others. Instead, she pointed at 2 rectangular spatial fragments, 3 rectangular spatial fragments, and 1 6-star spatial fragment that was slightly further away. The 6-star spatial fragment was even further behind a pile of spatial fragments. Xiaohua was stunned. He looked up at Fairy Xingyue and said, "It seems, Senior, you're not just relying on your experience." "Oh? Is that so?" Fairy Xingyue shrugged and said, "I'm afraid you're mistaken. I didn't use any magical power. This is just my experience." Xiaohua nodded. "Senior, you're right. I understand." Then Xiaohua pointed at the 6-star spatial fragment in the distance and said, "There's only 1 6-star spatial fragment within a dozen miles of the left. The 6-star spatial fragment is very magical. Any spatial fragment that collides with it will turn into 6 wisps of aura. These 6 wisps of aura are easy to balance with each other. Other shapes don't have this characteristic. I think this 6-star spatial fragment is safer." Xiaohua only said that he was guessing and did not say what he had seen. Suji's cold face relaxed slightly. He nodded and said, "According to our previous experience, the normal shapes, such as rectangular and square, are similar to the fragments of the 1,000 Demons' sacred realm. The strange line-like fragments are the fragments of the ancient desolation. The hexagonal, heptagonal, or other more complicated shapes should be similar to the fragments of the immortal world, the Demon League, and even the Dragon Realm. And according to our experience, the fragments with complicated shapes are usually at the back. We won't choose such a fragment for the first time." Fairy Xingyue added. Hearing Fairy Xingyue mention experience, Suji looked up at her and smiled bitterly. It was just a little late. Their previous experience was already unreliable. What was the use of mentioning experience now? Haha, maybe there's a transmission channel in this fragment? Xiaohua said optimistically. Senior, how should we go in? Are we just going to fly in like that? Of course not. That's courting death. Fairy Xingyue shook her head and took out a magic weapon that looked like an astrolabe from her soft armor. She looked around and took a few steps sideways. Then, she looked around again and took 2 more steps forward. Xiaohua noticed that there was a flame flashing in Fairy Xingyue's right eye. Although the flame had a strong aura of starlight, Xiaohua could see clearly that there were also very few green threads of light in it. Forbidden power! Xiaohua narrowed his eyes. He knew that Suji was not exaggerating. In order to destroy the Tao, the Immortals, Buddhas, and demons could join forces to wipe out the Tao sect cultivators from the 3 continents. Immortal Emperor Gaotian could also raise the Tao sect cultivators like dogs in the Penlai immortal realm. Since the immortals of the immortal world regarded soul cultivation as a taboo, they would definitely have more powerful and violent means to deal with matters related to soul cultivation. Then, why did the immortal world regard soul cultivation as a taboo power? Judging from the few traces of green seal script in Fairy Xingyue's cultivation method, which was similar to the immortal world's cultivation method, Xiaohua knew that soul cultivation could connect heaven and earth and make ghosts and gods weep. Thinking of this, Xiaohua could not help but send a voice transmission. Senior, I still have a question that I want to ask you. Hearing Xiaohua's voice transmission, Suji frowned and said, Since you shouldn't ask, then don't ask. Even if you asked, I won't answer. Alas, I know I shouldn't ask. But the problem is, apart from you, I really can't find anyone in the 3 continents to ask. Xiaohua said helplessly. And you're the only person in the world that I can trust. I've already told you that no one in the world can be trusted. Including me. Su Ji replied mercilessly. However, Su Ji thought for a moment and said, If you think you have to ask, you can ask, but I can decide not to answer. Okay. Xiaohua nodded hurriedly. Looking at Fairy Xingyue, who was wandering in the starry sky, he asked, I've seen the devil world's devil emperor sacrifice millions of blood spirits. He wanted to borrow the souls of those blood spirits. I don't understand. What's the use of these souls? Of course, in our Taoist Dharma spells, refining our natal Dharma treasures and cultivating the nascent soul out of the body also require the power of souls. I know this, but I don't understand. With so many souls, what kind of divine ability can you cultivate? You should ask the devil race this question. Su Ji did not want to answer Xiaohua's question. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. He himself had a demon lord's little brother, and this little brother was a pure demon clan's devil spirit. He also had the devil blade murder, but Xiaohua was clear in his heart that the demon clan devoured souls and raised them based on their instincts. They really didn't know the true use of souls, or perhaps only a higher realm than the demon realm would know. Seeing Xiaohua's bitter smile, Su Ji seemed to be unable to bear it. He thought for a moment and said, The human race often says that human nature is the most complicated thing in the world. Then this soul is the most mysterious thing in the world. Even immortals don't dare to touch the power of souls. Let's put it this way. The foundation of the Buddhist sect's 9 transformations golden body is reincarnation, and the foundation of reincarnation is the soul. The foundation of the Buddhist sect's golden body and Buddha fruit is faith. Faith is a manifestation of the power of souls. Just this manifestation has created the Buddhist sect, a Buddhist sect that can compete with the Taoist sect. How big of an impact do you think the power of souls will have? Oh, Xiaohua, what do you think is the most primitive power of souls? P.S. Fellow Taoists who like this book, please come to the starting point to vote. Vote for recommendation, collect, and reward. Thank you for all your support. Chapter 45:11. Of course, Xiaohua knew that the answer Su Ji was talking about was probably the soul. However, he thought about it and answered in the opposite way. From what I know, it should be pure physical strength. Yes, you're right. Su Ji nodded. Whether it's the human race, the demon race, the spirit race, the devil race, or the divine race and the holy light race that you don't know about, they all admit that the most primitive power in this world is the physical strength. Of course, the physical bodies of the other races may be different from the physical bodies of the human race. However, as far as I know, an immortal king who once came into contact with the forbidden power said that the most primitive power in this world is probably the soul power. Because the soul was formed long before the physical body can decay and decay, but the soul exists forever. Junior understands. Xiaohua nodded. You don't understand. Su Ji interrupted Xiaohua unceremoniously and continued to explain. I don't know if you know about the underworld. The underworld has the power of the dead, which is also a part of the soul power. The power of the dead is the nemesis of all magic power, immortal power, and Buddhist power. The underworld is not a simple world. It is the place where all life is annihilated and where all life sprouts. Even someone as strong as the Heavenly Lord of Punishment of the Punishment Palace doesn't dare to provoke the underworld because the underworld has a part of the soul power. Xiaohua, Taoists can become immortals by cultivating spells, Confucian cultivators can ascend to heaven by cultivating Confucian techniques, Buddhists can cultivate the 9 transformations golden body, demons can break through the starry sky by tempering their demonic bodies, then, those who can control the soul power can cultivate gods. Gods? Xiaohua pretended to be surprised. Gods, what are they? Can they also be cultivated? Su Ji didn't answer. He saw that Fairy Xingyu had stopped and turned to look at him. He nodded at Fairy Xingyu and stared at Xiaohua. Xiaohua, this is my last sentence. In the future, don't ask any other immortals such questions. Gods may be the end of the immortals' cultivation, or the end of the Demon League, the immortal world, and the heavenly court. However, no immortal knows, whether or not, he will be a god at the end of his cultivation. Because there is a saying in the immortal world, gods can never be cultivated. Only the ancient times had gods. In the current era, there are no more miracles, and no more gods. So, Xiaohua, there's no need to talk about taboo energy in the future. After saying that, Su Ji moved and landed beside Fairy Xingyue. He asked, Xingyue, are you ready? Yes, I can activate it now. Fairy Xingyue nodded and said, However, I need a breath of immortal qi. I just changed my body, so I can't activate the immortal mark. Then let me do it. Su Ji raised his hand to take the astrolabe, but Fairy Xingyu said worriedly, You just used a similar immortal technique. Can your body withstand it? Didn't I just say it? I don't need this body anymore. It won't be a problem. Su Ji indifferently said and took the star plate. Then he shouted to Xiaohua, who was in a daze. Xiaohua, quickly come over, we are about to enter. After saying that, Su Ji raised his eyebrows again. He looked at the distant starry sky and saw a fat figure. He snorted coldly and said, You're fast. It's only been a moment. I'm afraid you've already killed a few more people. Of course he doesn't care about other people's lives. Fairy Xingyue also said coldly, He only cares about his own life. Xiaohua was a little shocked by Su Ji's words. At this time, he had just come to his senses. He turned his head and looked at the body of the Buddha occupied by the Grand Mist Ancestor. He suddenly understood and sighed. I'd rather betray the world than let the world betray me. Let's go. I don't want to see this filthy thing. Su Ji raised his hand and threw the astrolabe into the air. He spat a mouthful of immortal qi on the astrolabe. The astrolabe did not change, but Su Ji's face began to look old. His sideburns were stained with white frost, and his face was full of wrinkles. Seeing this, Xiaohua was suddenly shocked and felt a chill run down his back. The warning of the Hotu Stockade's Elder Wu rang in his ears again. Su Ji's words just now also rang in his ears. He thought with a trembling heart, I don't know if my body is worth the trust in Su Ji's heart. Su Ji's celestial spiritual qi landed on the astrolabe, and a silvery white brilliance appeared on the astrolabe. Layers of mysterious markings rushed out from the brilliance, and these markings were formed by densely packed runes. As the markings flew out, Su Ji rubbed his hands together, and thick crystal lights fell into the astrolabe. The markings then turned into hundreds of flying birds, and these birds had starlight engraved on their foreheads. Their eyes were like crescent moons, and when their wings flapped, the sound of wind and thunder could be heard. Go! Suji waved his sleeve. The hundreds of birds flew into the meteor belt with a quack quack sound. Let's go. We'll use the simplest flying technique. Suji returned the astrolabe to Fairy Xingyu and put his hands behind his back. A faint cloud appeared under his feet, and he rushed into the meteor belt with the birds. Fairy Xingyu took the astrolabe, raised her slender hand, and pointed at different places on the astrolabe. The astrolabe emitted several layers of obscure fluctuations, directing the birds to fly in an extremely zigzagging direction. However, after flying for hundreds of feet, the bird in front exploded with a boom. The birds behind it immediately flapped their tails and flew in another direction beautifully. The fierce interim storm around them was like the night wind, causing the feathers of the birds to tremble slightly. Xiaohua and the others naturally followed the birds and flew in another direction. The six-star space fragment looked very close, but it was extremely far away. After flying for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, one of the hundreds of birds would be destroyed in a short while. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there were less than 20 birds left. Looking at the six-star-shaped space fragment again, it seemed to still be flickering with faint starlight in the distance. Suji said in a low voice, "Every realm has an edge. There's never an endless thing. The reason why it feels endless is because you're in the realm. As long as you're in the realm, if you don't have a magical power that transcends the realm, even if you reach the edge of the realm, you still won't be able to see the realm. So, you'll feel that the realm is endless. These space fragments come from different realms. The aura of each realm is different, and the aura of the fragments won't merge. Therefore, you can see each space fragment as an independent realm. You're in the meteor belt, so you can also see a larger space fragment. If you can't find a way to enter the space fragment, it will always keep a distance from you." Suji, Fairy Xingyu said with some dissatisfaction. "Didn't you say that you can't reveal too much about the immortal divinity? You can't reveal too much about the immortal realm to Xiaohua. How can you casually tell Xiaohua about the immortal realm? This is just to broaden his horizons. It's not considered teaching him the mysteries of the immortal realm," Suji said disapprovingly. "Besides, he's already seen the seven-colored shell. Do you think he didn't get anything from it?" Hee. Xiaohua smiled and asked, "Fairy, I have a question, but I don't know if I should ask it." "Don't ask." Fairy Xingyu hurriedly waved her hand and said, "Your question must involve the immortal realm again." "Okay then." Xiaohua shrugged and immediately stopped asking. However, a smile had already appeared at the corner of his mouth. Sure enough, after a while, Fairy Xingyu urged again. "What are you asking? Why aren't you talking?" Hee. Xiaohua blinked and asked, "Senior, you came from the Palace of Justice. You must know the various realms very well?" "I don't know." Fairy Xingyu shook her head like a rattledrum. "I'm just occasionally ordered by the Palace of Justice to check some things. I've met the demon clan of the 10,000 demon realm who broke through the realms in the Dawn Rain continent. I've also met the seven-colored sea god shell from the Red Sea domain in the 1,000 demons sacred realm. Well, the two seniors are also from the immortal realm. I'm very curious. Why is it so easy to break through the realms?" Xiaohua ignored Fairy Xingyu's shaking of her head and asked seriously, "Didn't Senior Su just say that it's difficult to break through the realms in the realms? It's naturally difficult to break through the ordinary realms, but the three continents are a bit special." Fairy Xingyu was a female immortal after all, so she couldn't help showing off a little. However, she only said half a sentence and stopped. She raised her hand and pointed at the six-star space fragment that still looked very far away. "Look again. Is it close to that space fragment?" "Okay." Xiaohua knew that Fairy Xingyu wouldn't say anything else, so he had no choice but to prepare to activate his delusion breaker Dharma Eye. However, before he activated it, he suddenly thought of something and said with a smile, "Fairy, I don't know any special spells. Of course, I can't see any clues. Everything still depends on your magic power. Fairy Xingyu glanced at Xiaohua and rolled her eyes at him. Then she spat out a mouthful of quintessential essence at the astrolabe in her hand. Swoosh! A pillar of stars rushed out of the astrolabe and caught up with the few remaining birds in front of them. Caw! The birds cried out sadly and turned into fireflies. Then, the entire pillar of stars swept toward the space fragment like a whirlwind. Poof, poof, poof. The sound of explosions came from the pillar of stars. The aura of the realms had hit the pillar of stars and made it full of holes. However, the shattered pillar of stars also revealed a safe path at this time and fell into the brilliance of the space fragment. Suji was still in front. His figure followed the pillar of stars and fell into the brilliance. Xiaohua could clearly see that Suji's figure was getting smaller and smaller. Xiaohua watched Suji's figure shrink. Outside the meteor belt in the distance, the fat figure of the Grand Mist Ancestor appeared again. The Grand Mist Ancestor squinted and watched Xiaohua and the other two shrink and fall into the hexagonal space fragment with a solemn expression on his face. Chapter 45:12. The Grand Mist Ancestor originally wanted to fly over and enter the meteor belt with Xiaohua and the others. However, when he saw Suji spurting out immortal spiritual energy and activating the astrolabe, he stopped in the distance. It was only when Xiaohua and the others flew in that he quickly flew over. He looked at the backs of the three people and thought to himself, although this person looks a little unfamiliar, the way he activates the astrolabe is exactly the same as that person. If I'm not mistaken, it's him. Humph, since he's still alive, why didn't he save me? This kind of senior, it's fine if I don't recognize him. With that thought, the Grand Mist Ancestor waved his fat monk robe. 2 balls of black and white air flew out and turned into thousands of thin threads in the meteor belt. These thin threads seemed to have intelligence, and were rapidly drawn into the turbulent flow of the realm. They were either torn apart or moved against the flow. In just a moment, the turbulent flow that was invisible to the naked eye and divine sense was clearly revealed to the Grand Mist Ancestor. He watched as the black and white threads spread further and gradually covered the space fragments within a dozen li. The black and white threads were indeed effective. Wherever there was a dead end, the black and white threads would cut off randomly. Wherever there was a way out, the threads would rapidly extend and reveal the path of light. Seeing this, the Grand Mist Ancestor smiled proudly. This old man has the yin-yang illustration manual. In this star-moon palace, there's nothing that can stop me. With that said, the Grand Mist Ancestor's figure flickered as he stepped onto the black and white thread. The black and white thread immediately turned into a cloud that carried him towards the nearest light path. When the Grand Mist Ancestor's figure gradually shrank, the figures of the scholarly cultivators and the great monsters of the demon race appeared. Xiaohua followed Fairy Xingyu and flew along the pillar of stars. The pillar of stars in front of the realm's aura presented a very strange distorted shape. It was like a fried dough twist with 6 revolutions. 3 of the revolutions were blurry and indistinguishable by the time they reached the space. The remaining 3 were crooked as they probed into the space's brilliance. As for the pillar of stars, it was destroyed by the realm's aura. In front of the 2 was Suji. Suji seemed to be very familiar with this situation. Without any hesitation, not only did he fly with the pillar of stars, he also spun with the pillar of stars. In fact, there were many times when he was still facing down in Xiaohua's eyes. Xiaohua didn't dare to act rashly. His entire body followed the rotation of the star pillar. He didn't dare to be careless at all. After circling around a few times, Xiaohua suddenly heard a rumbling sound beside his ears. In a flash, the hexagonal spatial fragment that wasn't too far from him suddenly appeared in front of him. The hexagonal fragment had already disappeared, and what entered his eyes was only an enormous light shadow. This light shadow was like a huge dome of heaven, covering the entire space. Moreover, under this dome of heaven, there were several kinds of indescribable auras. These auras interweaved together, blocking the light shadow. However, within the light and shadow, the star pillar had already pierced into the light and shadow, and a series of phantoms that resembled doors appeared in the light and shadow. At this time, Suji had already stopped. His hands moved slightly, and streaks of water-blue thunderbolts appeared like horned dragons, slowly rolling up and down his body. Fairy Xingyu's face was also solemn. She raised her hands slightly, put away the astrolabe, and took out a magic weapon that looked like a crescent moon. The soft armor on her body also emitted starlight, and a faintly discernible restriction protected her body. "Xiaohua!" Suji called out without turning his head. "Take out your magic weapon! I don't know what kind of space is inside this spatial fragment, and I don't know which realm this fragment came from." "Yes." As Xiaohua spoke, he took out the Tingjiao shears from his bosom. Under the urging of his magic power, the entire Tingjiao shears emitted a dazzling golden light. Seeing this dazzling golden light swimming in Xiaohua's hand like a dragon, Fairy Xingyu couldn't help but exclaim, "What a treasure! Xiaohua, I really didn't expect you to have a capital spiritual treasure. It's a pity that this capital spiritual treasure is somewhat incomplete." "I was lucky," Xiaohua said with a smile. "I snatched it from the Xiaoyu continent. That person took half of it that day, and I don't know where the other half is. It's good that you can use it." Suji didn't say much. He watched as the shadow of the star pillar crashed into the space gradually solidified. He shouted, "Xingyu, Xiaohua, let's rush in!" "Okay!" Fairy Xingyu and Xiaohua shouted in unison, urging their figures to rush toward the shadow of the door at the same time. Boom! Just as Xiaohua rushed into the light shadow, he felt that his surroundings were surrounded by clouds and mist, followed by the sound of thunder. Bolts of heavenly lightning fell on top of his head like the Milky Way spilling out. Moreover, there was an inexplicable pressure on Xiaohua's body. This pressure was so great that it felt as if the whole world was pressing down on his shoulders, making it difficult for him to move. However, this was nothing. The strangest thing was that in addition to the heavy pressure on Xiaohua's body, there were also tens of millions of tiny vortexes trying to drill into Xiaohua's body. A sour and painful feeling came from his body. "Humph!" Xiaohua snorted coldly and urged his transcendent's golden body. While his body was flowing with golden light, his figure continued to expand. Swish, swish. Without waiting for Xiaohua to straighten his back, two silvery white human-shaped lights that were at least 3,000 meters long appeared in front of his head. Moreover, from those lights there was a kind of pressure that made Xiaohua feel fear. It surged towards Xiaohua like a surging tide, blocking Xiaohua's mouth and nose. Moreover, the pressure was like a mountain pressing down. Xiaohua's Mahayana cultivator's pressure couldn't help but be stimulated, and he tried his best to resist. However, this pressure was nothing more than a pellet in front of the mountain-like pressure. There was no way it could compare at all. Large beads of sweat dripped down from Xiaohua's temples. Xiaohua's straight body was slightly bent as an irresistible fear arose spontaneously. This is the fragment of the immortal realm?" Fairy Xingyu was a little puzzled, a little surprised, and screamed with ecstasy. "Don't be in such a hurry to look at the fragment," Suji's calm voice sounded. "We didn't expect that the first fragment to be the same space as the immortal realm. Our top priority now is to quickly stabilize the immortal qi in our bodies. Don't strengthen it anymore, or our bodies won't be able to support it. Oh, quickly restrain your pressure. Xiaohua doesn't have any consciousness, so he can't resist our spiritual pressure." As he spoke, the mountain-like pressure gradually shrank and fell into the silvery light. Only then did Xiaohua breathe a sigh of relief. He opened his mouth to say something in a hoarse voice, but the abundant immortal qi rushed into his mouth and nose again. This immortal qi was of a much higher level than the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the three continents. When it rushed into Xiaohua's mouth and nose, it immediately caused discomfort in his body. He didn't know how many years he had not felt choking on water, but it rushed into his head. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly held his breath and condensed his qi, urging the Dharma power in his body to create a defense on the surface of his body. Before he could urge his Dharma power, Suji's voice sounded from the silvery light. His voice was like a thunderclap that resounded through the entire space. Xiaohua, don't urge your Dharma power. All your spells now are based on the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the 3 continents. This is a fragment of the realm similar to the immortal realm. The immortal qi inside is similar to the immortal realm. When this immortal qi comes into contact with spells based on the yuan qi of heaven and earth, it will change. If it's light, it will destroy the spell. If it's heavy, it will cause a backlash and invade your body. Okay. Xiaohua didn't speak and hurriedly nodded. Then, from another silvery human figure, an object that emitted the brilliance of the stars and moon flew out. Fairy Xingyu's voice also sounded from it. Humph, I hate stingy people like you the most. I don't believe that you don't have a protective heavenly spiritual treasure. If it weren't for the fact that this is a fragment of the immortal realm and I'm afraid that your body would explode from the immortal qi, I wouldn't have bothered to give you my immortal armor. The object landed in front of Xiaohua. It was a very simple and crude star armor. This star armor was refined from some strange star stones. Between the star stones were some crystal threads that were as thin as hair. These crystal threads not only strung the star stones together, but they also flashed with traces of cold light, looking very sharp. Xiaohua took the star armor and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After all, this was Fairy Xingyu's star armor. How could he, a male cultivator, wear it? This suspicion. He still had to avoid it. You can't activate this star armor now. Suji's voice sounded. Put it on first. I'll activate it for you. Since Suji didn't say anything, Xiaohua could only obey. He threw the star armor, which fell like a fishing net. The 100 or so star stones on the star armor covered Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua deliberately looked at his chest. Fortunately, there weren't any extra star stones. Gotcha! Hundreds of silver-white thunderbolts appeared in the silver figure that Suji was in and gathered on every star stone on the star armor. Rumble! The star armor actually rumbled like a Dharma treasure. The 100 or so star stones turned into the shape of stars and began to rotate. The immortal qi nearby also let out a cheerful cry and crashed into the stars. In just a moment, the stars turned into pieces and the entire star armor turned into a strange armor that covered Xiaohua's body. Once the armor was formed, the corrosion from the immortal qi disappeared immediately. The corrosion on his mouth and nose also disappeared. Xiaohua looked at the armor that was flowing with starlight and moved his hands and feet. He frowned slightly. This was because his body didn't have any special discomfort in the ruins or the primitive continent. Why were there so many abnormalities in this fragment of the immortal realm? Gotcha! Xiaohua's problem was solved. Tens of thousands of tiny thunderbolts appeared around the silver figure that Suji was in. These thunderbolts were like horned dragons that surrounded the silver figure and rotated crazily. The silver figure also gradually shrank with the rotation of the thunderbolts. At the same time, a resplendent galaxy flew out from the silver figure of another silver figure and also rotated from top to bottom. Every time it rotated, some of the silver light fell into the galaxy. The silver light that was thousands of feet in size shrank almost simultaneously with Suji's silver light. Chapter 45:13. After the time it took to burn an incense stick, Suji and Fairy Xingyu's bodies were revealed again, but this time, they were different from before. Not only were there silver scars all over their bodies, but there were also lightning and starlight flowing through these scars, as if they were trying to stop these scars from spreading. The armor that they had worn before was also faintly flashing between the silver spots, looking erratic. The strangest thing was their faces. In the beginning, their faces were replaced by a flickering silver light. Later on, their faces gradually appeared. However, some parts of their faces were that of humans, while some parts were covered by silver light. It looked extremely strange. In the end, their faces were completely revealed. However, from time to time, their faces would be covered by the silver light. When their faces were revealed, there was nothing special about them. However, when they were covered by the silver light, a kind of majesty and respect was involuntarily emitted, forcing Xiaohua to move slightly. presumably. Behind the star armor, Xiaohua slightly narrowed his eyes and thought to himself, "This is the true appearance of an immortal." Phew! Su Ji let out a long breath, looking even more nervous than Xiaohua. Fairy Xingyu raised her arm, shook it a few times, and said, "This body is really tiring. The feeling of freedom just now was really good." "Yes." Su Ji nodded. "When we were in the immortal realm, we never felt that there was anything abnormal about it. But after leaving the immortal realm, we realized the benefits of an immortal body. There's a saying in my hometown, when you're not sick, you're not sick. When you're sick, you realize the importance of health. Let's go quickly," Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. "I can't wait. This time, we have to find the passage back to the immortal realm no matter what." "Xiaohua." Su Ji nodded, looked at Xiaohua and asked, "Can you still adapt?" "It's okay for now." Xiaohua nodded. "However, I don't know what role I can play in this fragment of the immortal realm." "In this fragment of the immortal realm, you're just a mortal," Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. "Your magic arts, magic treasures, and other things can't be used. Even if it could be used, its effect would not be comparable to an immortal artifact. Oh, don't rashly open your Qianquan pouch here. Be careful that the immortal spiritual energy inside your Qianquan pouch will burst. As for your Kunlun mirror, it should be usable, but I can't guarantee that it won't be damaged if you don't refine it with immortal qi. Forget it, forget it." Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "Just treat me as an idle person. With two real immortals following me, what do I have to be afraid of?" "Hee hee." Fairy Xingyu had covered her mouth and giggled. "Then let's make a cupboard." After saying that, Fairy Xingyu released her lingering thoughts, wanting to look into the distance. Su Ji hurriedly stopped her and said, "Xingyue, it's better to be careful. Don't release too many lingering thoughts." "Got it." Goddess Xingyu smiled sweetly. Coincidentally, her appearance was covered by the silver light. A sweet smile seemed to pass through the space and into Xiaohua's mind. Fairy Xingyu did not release her lingering thoughts into the distance. Her figure flew slowly. Su Ji waved his sleeve and covered Xiaohua's body. He said, "Let's go," and followed Fairy Xingyu. After flying for a while, Fairy Xingyu released her star shuttle with a wave of her hand. At this time, the star shuttle was even more majestic than before. Tens of thousands of starlight rushed into the sky and fell in all directions, like a dazzling meteor shower. However, after a while, the starlight withered and disappeared into thin air. Fairy Xingyu's face changed drastically as she looked at Su Ji. Su Ji frowned slightly but did not care. He raised his hand and pointed ahead. The two of them flew over with Xiaohua. Xiaohua looked a little absent-minded. He did not pay attention to Fairy Xingyu's star shuttle. He was puzzled by the smile that Fairy Xingyu transmitted into his mind. What are immortals? I have never seen immortals before, so I have never thought about this question. Now that these two exiled immortals have been here for a long time, they feel that immortals are similar to us. But today, when I really came to the fragment of the immortal world, I realized that immortals are completely different from us mortals. In Tao sect cultivation, the physical body is extremely important. It is also the foundation of becoming an immortal. Without a physical body, one cannot ascend to the immortal world. Previously, I thought that it was because the immortal spirit qi was different from the heaven and earth origin qi. If it were not for the protection of the physical body, the nascent soul would be destroyed by the immortal spirit qi. But now, it seems that if the physical body has not been cleansed by the spirit cleansing pool, it cannot withstand the immortal spirit qi. Then, how can I protect my nascent soul? Moreover, Su Ji had said before that even if I lost my physical body, as long as I cultivated my scattered soul to the 9 tribulations, I would be able to grow a physical body. Naturally, I would be able to enter the spirit cleansing pool and grow a physical body. It seems that the spirit cleansing pool is the most important thing. The spirit cleansing liquid in the spirit cleansing pool. What is it? What is the difference between it and the dragon cleansing liquid in the dragon cleansing pool? Xiaohua's question could only be a question. Not to mention that he could not find any answers now. Even if he asked Su Ji would probably not answer him. However, in a short moment, he had a new question. He looked at the ground that whistled past. On the ground, there were either deep ravines or undulating mountain ranges. It seemed that everything on the ground was much larger than the 3 continents. He asked curiously, "Senior, Junior has 2 questions to ask." Su Ji looked ahead and answered expressionlessly. Senior said before that the so-called realm, as long as one is within it, one will not be able to see the edge. We've entered this spatial fragment, so how can we find the way out? Xiaohua asked. The spatial fragments in the meteor belt are all incomplete. They were used by people with great ability to set up defenses when the Star Moon Palace was refined in the ancient times. Once we find the location of the other incomplete part of the spatial fragment, we will be able to see the meteor belt. From there, we can fly to the other spatial fragment. Su Ji answered fluently. However, he stopped at this point, as if there were some secrets that he did not say. Xiaohua nodded and asked again. Senior said that there are fragments of realms parallel to the 1,000 Demons Sacred Realm, fragments of realms parallel to the Immortal Realm, and fragments of realms parallel to the ancient times. This time, when we enter the fragment of realms parallel to the Immortal Realm, the immortal chi inside is extremely dense. Even with Junior's strength, I can't withstand it. How can the cultivators who followed Senior in the past withstand it? Actually, it's like this, Su Ji said without any hesitation. Although I don't have a space or a spatial immortal weapon, I still have the Heaven and Earth bracelet. Under normal circumstances, I respect the wishes of those cultivators and bring them here to gain experience. If an accident really happens, I will definitely keep them in the Heaven and Earth bracelet. Although staying in the Heaven and Earth bracelet is an insult to the human race, it's still better than losing their lives. Of course, if I didn't make it in time, like just now, they would have lost their lives. I don't have any good ideas. After all, Xingyu's star armor isn't something that just anyone can borrow. Oh, also, Su Ji continued. Previously, we also encountered some fragments of realms parallel to the Immortal Realm. However, the immortal chi inside those fragments was already thin. Although it was somewhat dangerous, it was far from being as serious as today. Also, Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked again. Didn't you have 2 questions? Su Ji asked curiously. Xiaohua smiled. Junior has thought of another problem. And say it. Su Ji nodded. Know what you know, don't know what you don't know, you are suitable to be a Confucian cultivator. Senior said so. Xiaohua asked. There are also fragments of realms parallel to the ancient times. Then, the Immortal Realm should be of a higher level than the Immortal Realm, right? Yes, the Immortal Realm usually calls the Immortal Realm the Immortal Realm. Su Ji replied. Then, Xiaohua asked. Senior and the others entered the fragment of the Immortal Realm. Did their bodies feel uncomfortable? What about those lower-level disciples? At this moment, Su Ji showed a rare hesitation. After a moment, Su Ji opened his mouth. Xiaohua, this question. I can answer you. But I don't know if my answer is correct because I have never been to the Immortal Realm, and I don't know what the ancient times were like. I also don't know what the ancient times were like when the Star Moon Palace was refined. I only know that some fragments are similar to the 3 continents and the realms below the Immortal Realm. Some fragments are similar to the Immortal Realm, the Demon League and the Heavenly Court. And some fragments are different from these 2 places. So Xingyue and I think, listen carefully, we think that these fragments might be fragments of the ancient times. But whether these fragments are fragments of the ancient times or not, we don't know. And in these fragments, our bodies didn't change, and the bodies of those lower-level disciples didn't change either. I also don't know what I am talking about, do you understand? Yes, Junior understands. Although the doubts in Xiaohua's heart grew stronger, he still heaved a sigh of relief. Are you sure you understand? Su Ji asked curiously. I won't hide it from you. I thought about this before, but this matter has nothing to do with cultivation and returning to the immortal realm. I just thought about it and threw it away. And this junior thinks so too, Xiaohua said with a smile. This junior just had a sudden whim. Then, the two of them fell silent. They flew forward silently. Xiaohua didn't know what Suji was thinking, but he knew that although Suji was an immortal, Suji didn't understand the ancient times as well as Xiaohua. Not only had Xiaohua been to the immortal realm, but Xiaohua's Fortune Gate disciples had also been there. When those 5th grade Essence Force disciples were in the immortal realm, their bodies didn't go through any special tempering, and they also didn't experience the same problem as today. And Xiaohua's body, which was a half-god body, was actually corroded by the immortal spiritual energy. This was something that Xiaohua couldn't understand. Chapter 45:14. After a long while, Fairy Xingyu saw some colorful lights filling the sky in front of her. She said in surprise, Suji, look, there is still light in this space fragment. Maybe there is an ancient cave residence. Our opportunity has come. Don't be careless. Suji hurriedly reminded her. The more abodes there are, the more celestial beasts there will be. You must be careful. I know. Do I need you to tell me that? Fairy Xingyu said indifferently and sped up again. As if reminded by the light, Suji hesitated and said, Xiaohua, I think the problem you mentioned just now is like this. Before Taoist cultivators ascend to become celestials, they rely on the qi of heaven and earth to cultivate. When they reach the celestial realm, they will not be able to adapt to the celestial spiritual qi. As for the celestials in the celestial realm, low-level celestials such as mortal fairies also rely on the celestial spiritual qi to cultivate. When they reach the high level, they will no longer rely on the celestial spiritual qi. Presumably, in the untainted divine realm, the foundation of cultivation is also different. Therefore, the cultivators will be troubled by the celestial spiritual qi in the fragment of the celestial realm. But in the fragment of the untainted divine realm, there will be no such confusion, right? What do high-level celestials rely on to cultivate? Xiaohua asked, hitting the nail on the head. Alas, that's why I don't want to answer your question. Suji sighed. You haven't cultivated to that level yet. It's really not good for you to know too much. After that, Suji stopped talking and flew ahead with Xiaohua. Xiaohua had no choice but to shut up. After another 10 minutes, the light was in sight. Under the light, there was neither a spiritual vein nor an abode, but a vast expanse of tall palaces that stretched as far as the eye could see. These palaces were tens of thousands of feet tall, but all of them were damaged or collapsed. If it weren't for the extremely beautiful light emitted by these palaces, they wouldn't be much different from the ruins of the mortal world. As they flew closer, Xiaohua saw that the ground around the palaces was covered with deep cracks and deep holes. These cracks and deep holes were obviously caused by a fight. Next to these cracks, there were some broken celestial artifacts scattered around. This? Fairy Xingyu looked at Suji in surprise. Suji also looked surprised. The two of them sped up again. Hiss! In just a moment, not to mention Suji and Fairy Xingyu, even Xiaohua could not help but gasp. Because right before the overturned wreckage, there were already many wreckages of several thousand feet in length lying on the ground. These corpses were different from the corpses of the human clan. Most of them were wearing armors and holding some fairy weapons in their hands. Inside the armors, there was either nothing, or some shells that looked like tree roots. Of course, there were also some corpses that had collapsed beyond recognition. Something's wrong! Suji suddenly growled. He raised his hand and a spear-like immortal artifact fell into his hand. He glanced at the bottom of the immortal artifact and exclaimed, Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion? How is this possible? Fairy Xingyu exclaimed as if she had seen a ghost. She also raised her hand and another empty armor fell into her hand. When she looked at the mark on the inside of the armor, her face was as incredulous as Suji's. How is this possible? Then Suji threw Xiaohua to the ground and said, Stay here and don't move! Remember, don't move! This is very important. After that, without waiting for Xiaohua to answer, he rushed toward the dilapidated palaces in the distance. Of course, Fairy Xingyue was no exception. Her figure flashed, faster than the light shadow, almost surpassing Su Ji's figure. Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion? Xiaohua naturally heard Su Ji's exclamation. He did not understand what this Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion was. However, judging from the reactions of the two immortals, one was a law enforcer and the other was a law enforcer, this so-called Heavenly Mansion was definitely a famous place in the immortal realm. Moreover, since the two immortals did not want to go in with him, there must be some so-called secret of the immortal realm inside. Xiaohua naturally knew to stay where he was. Of course, Xiaohua only stood there for a moment before he came to his senses. Damn it, that's not right! This Xingyue palace was refined in ancient times. Since Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu know about this Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion, this space fragment must have been left behind from the immortal realm in ancient times. In that case... Thinking of this, a smile appeared on Xiaohua's face. In that case, this Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion must be a secret place in ancient times. There are endless secrets hidden inside. Damn it, this space fragment is a huge gold mine. Since I've already entered the gold mine, how can I return empty-handed? Since he knew that this collapsed palace was a famous secret of the immortal realm in ancient times, how could Xiaohua still stand in the distance obediently? He rolled his eyes and activated the flying technique of the soul cultivator. He stuck close to the ground and walked to another place. As he walked, he sensed his own space. Sure enough, as Fairy Xingyu had said, he could already sense his space here. Everything in the space could be taken out. Xiaohua even tried to put an empty armor and immortal weapon into the space. He could do the same. However, the armor and immortal weapon were not located in the original Shenhua continent. Therefore, Xiaohua kept some armor and immortal weapons into the space as he walked. Xiaohua also noticed some things like bracelets, rings, and storage bags. He did not even look at them. They were all put into the space. Xiaohua was already used to stealing things. It had even become a technique. There were many bodies lying on the ground outside the palace. They were either dense or sparse. When they were sparse, Xiaohua only took those bracelets, belts, and the like. When they were dense, Xiaohua took 4 out of 10 of them. This made it so that the density would become sparse and not arouse suspicion. Damn, these are all immortal weapons! The more Xiaohua walked, the more excited he became. This feeling of reaping without sowing was really rare and wonderful. However, after walking for a while, he didn't see Su Ji and Fairy Xingyue. Xiaohua walked to the other side of the hall. When he got there, Xiaohua suddenly stopped. He closed his eyes and seemed to be thinking. After a moment, he suddenly looked into the distance and thought to himself, "That's not right. Previously, in front of the palace, those armors. Oh, I'll take it as the place where the immortals fell. The immortals seem to have fallen in one direction, as if, in the direction where I came from. These immortals seem to be blocking another pair of immortals. The direction of these immortals was similar to the direction where I came from. Moreover, there are more belts and rings here. These immortal weapons are also of a higher level. Could it be? Thinking about this, Xiaohua wanted to release his divine sense. But after a short moment, Xiaohua shrugged his shoulders and said with a low chuckle, "This Xiao came here as a mortal. Not only do I have no divine sense, I also have no magic power. I can't even open the storage pouch Xiao. All the strange things that have happened here have nothing to do with me. No matter what happens, I'm the most innocent." Xiaohua smiled. He carefully identified the direction and walked in one direction. Along the way, he used his mind to store all the immortal weapons, armors, and immortal slips into his space. Sure enough, in the time it took to finish a meal, a bottomless abyss appeared in front of them. Within the abyss, there were many 5-colored clouds. Amidst the clouds, 2 lights that were brighter than the sun floated within the abyss, illuminating the entire abyss. However, the clouds blocked the lights, so they could not be seen from a distance. "Oh my God!" As soon as Xiaohua approached the abyss, he immediately felt the spiritual pressure in the light shadow that was even more vast than that of Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. Xiaohua felt as if a heavy hammer had hit his chest. He could not get close at all. "This is a big fish!" Xiaohua was overjoyed and almost screamed. "These must be two big shots who fought to the death." Xiaohua did not hesitate, and hurriedly released his mind. Sure enough, the spiritual pressure was like a mountain or an ocean, but Xiaohua's mind could still get close. Of course, Xiaohua's mind was just a trickle that could only flow around the light shadow. Even so, Xiaohua could already see that these were two shells that were tens of thousands of feet in size. The shells were full of a mixture of golden and silver light. There were also two immortal weapons in the light shadow. One was shaped like a knife, and the other was shaped like a spear. However, Xiaohua's mind could not get close to these two immortal weapons. "Damn it, you're already dead. Why are you still so stingy?" Xiaohua knew that these two immortals who had perished together were definitely big shots in the immortal world. He gritted his teeth. It seemed that the immortal weapons and other items that he had collected earlier were all scrap metal. "No!" Xiaohua shouted inwardly. "Even if this is a tiger, this shell will still pluck the fur from the tiger's tail." Thinking about this, Xiaohua's mind flowed like a stream between the tens of thousands of feet large shell and the armor. His mind was like a sympathetic person's hand that was extremely affectionate as it gently wandered around the wreckage. It was unwilling to cross over inch by inch. Ha! When Xiaohua's mind passed through the armor and landed on the belt, Xiaohua's mind saw something that looked like a jade seal. Xiaohua did not hesitate at all. His mind moved like a hand and immediately put the jade seal into the space. Immediately after, a thumb-sized jade pillar and a pitch-black box were also put into the space by Xiaohua. When Xiaohua's mind was ready to leave the wreckage, he saw a pendant hanging on the belt. Xiaohua put away the pendant, but he still wanted more. "Damn it, if I'm not afraid of being discovered by Su Ji, this belt, tisk, forget it!" The other wreckage was similar to this one. It also had a lot of harvest. In addition to the golden seal, there was also a pendant, a 5-claw-like pendant, a multi-pronged jade pillar, and a simple and unadorned key. Chapter 45:15. Phew! After looting the wreckage, Xiaohua let out a long breath and said with a smile, "Finally, this trip was not in vain!" In order not to arouse Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu's suspicion, Xiaohua hurriedly turned around and wanted to leave. However, just as he turned around, he suddenly froze on the spot. He hurriedly released his mind in disbelief. Sure enough, a moment later, Xiaohua revealed a thoughtful expression and thought to himself, "It's a little strange. These two unknown immortals had clearly perished together. However, one of them is holding a weapon in both hands, the other is holding a weapon in one hand, and the other hand. Why is it covering his back armpit? His back armpit is obviously not injured, so why is he covering it there? There must be something he cares about there. Even if he dies, he must protect it." Thinking about this, Xiaohua urged his mind and moved the immortal's hand away and placed it on the ground. Then, his mind penetrated into the armpit of the immortal. It was very strange. The immortal's body was different from the mortal's body. When Xiaohua's mind penetrated into the armpit, the immortal's body actually split open as if it was melting. Then, a 9-colored brilliance bloomed. Within the brilliance, an indescribable polyhedron appeared. It seemed to be in this space, but also seemed to not be in this space. Of course, this brilliance flashed, and the polyhedron was immediately taken into the space by Xiaohua. This polyhedron was different from the fairy artifacts that Xiaohua had taken into the space before. It fell into the space that had not been formed before. Seeing that the treasure was in his hands, Xiaohua did not delay at all. He turned around and went to other places to continue searching for armor, fairy artifacts, belts, and other things. Xiaohua originally thought that Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu would find him soon. However, what puzzled him was that Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu did not appear for a full hour. Could it be That there is an even more powerful restriction in this palace? Xiao Hua looked at the palace in front of him. Although the huge stone pillars had collapsed, the beautiful stone walls were flashing with brilliance for a long time. Xiao Hua had some thoughts in his mind. However, he was very self-aware. If Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu could not escape from the restriction in the palace, how could he? Since he was not empty-handed, why should he take the risk? Especially if there were taboos within this hall, then wouldn't he have touched the bottom line of the immortal dimension? Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu did not fall into a predicament like Xiao Hua had imagined. They did not separate, but hurriedly shuttled through the collapsed and dilapidated hall side by side. There were also many corpses in the hall, as well as many precious weapons and other items. However, the two of them did not take a second look at them. They did not dare to release too much of their expanded thoughts, and only extended them out a few 100 feet. However, their eyes were different at this time. One of Fairy Xingyu's eyes was like a full moon, while the other was like a bright star. Su Ji's eyes flashed with lightning. The two of them looked at each other with different gazes, as if they were searching for something. They flew into a huge palace. In this palace, there was a huge chair that had been split in half. On the stone wall above the chair, there was a plaque that gave off a milky white light. This plaque was now hanging at a slanted angle, and most of it was already broken. The gazes of the two landed on the signboard at the same time. Their bodies shook violently. At the same time, the silver light hidden under the armor involuntarily rushed out and wrapped around the bodies of the two. A moment later, the figures and faces of the two were once again revealed. Fairy Xingyu was shocked. She rushed to the front of the throne and wanted to take a closer look. However, before she could get close, the throne that had been split in half gave off an awe-inspiring aura, forcing Fairy Xingyu to retreat. She couldn't get close to the throne at all. Fairy Xingyu had no choice but to fly high and try her best to get close to the plaque on the stone wall. After taking a closer look, Fairy Xingyu's body stiffened. After a long while, she whispered, "How is this possible? This is really the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion. The most mysterious immortal mansion of the legendary Yiqiong. This immortal mansion. Isn't it in the immortal realm? How did it become a realm fragment of Star Moon Palace? Could it be that the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion disappeared in ancient times? That's even more impossible." Su Ji shook his head and said, "Yiqiong is a celestial venerable who became a celestial venerable recently before we fell into the mortal world. His Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion only appeared in the last 20 million years. How could it have disappeared in ancient times? Unless there was another Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion in ancient times, there's no other explanation for it being in Star Moon Palace." Fairy Xingyu deduced without hesitation. Su Ji nodded and said, "That's possible. No one can guarantee that there wasn't another Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion in ancient times. But... Fairy Xingyu hesitated a few times, and her face was full of doubts. She did not say the reason for the but. There seemed to be endless hesitation in her heart. Su Ji seemed to know what Fairy Xingyu wanted to say. He looked at Fairy Xingyu and opened his mouth, but in the end, he sighed and closed his mouth. Finally, Fairy Xingyu probed. "Su Ji, you've been following me since we entered this heavenly mansion. Are you afraid that there are restrictions in this heavenly mansion and want to protect me?" Su Ji shook his head and said, "This heavenly mansion has been destroyed. How could there be restrictions? Moreover, the heavenly mansion is full of celestial generals who have been killed. Even if there were restrictions, I'm afraid they would have been triggered by them. However, I don't want to be separated from you because I want to protect you. At the same time, I'm also protecting myself." Alas, that's right. Fairy Xingyu also understood what Su Ji meant, but she still did not want to make it clear. She sighed and said, "In that case, you and I. In this heavenly mansion, we can't be separated." "Yes." Su Ji smiled bitterly. "We'll search together, and then come here. Then we'll be honest. That's the only way." Fairy Xingyu's smile became even more bitter. It seemed that if she was given another chance, she would definitely not enter this space fragment so easily. Afterwards, the two of them spent another hour walking through most of the halls. Afterwards, they did not touch any of the items or corpses in the halls, and they returned to the main hall. Looking at the throne again, Suji said, "Xingyu, I think we're in big trouble." "Alas, yes." Fairy Xingyu stamped her feet in midair and said, "This is indeed the mysterious Yiqiong heavenly mansion that is widely rumored in the celestial realm. But this heavenly mansion, why would it be in the ancient Star Moon Palace?" "The ancient Star Moon Palace?" Suji said with a faint smile. "Who told you this? I'm afraid you came up with it yourself, right?" "Why not?" Fairy Xingyu frowned and said, "Although we found this Star Moon Palace first, the token to open this Star Moon Palace can also be found in the 3 continents. This means that before we came, the Star Moon Palace already existed and someone had already entered. It's just that they probably didn't have your divination skills. After they came in occasionally, they couldn't find any trace of the Star Moon Palace. Even so, it doesn't mean that the Star Moon Palace existed in ancient times, nor does it mean that the space fragments in this meteor belt were refined in the Star Moon Palace in ancient times." Suji explained. "This Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion is the best proof. The Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion must have fallen into the Star Moon Palace within 1,000,000 years. Okay. Fairy Xingyu was impatient, and waved her hand. "What's the use of saying this now? Let's find the divine cultivation mirror first. The problem is..." Suji looked worried. "The divine cultivation mirror is just a legend. Who knows if it really exists? Even Immortal King Tu-gong has never admitted it." "Suji, do you know that there's no smoke without fire?" Fairy Xingyu said. "If Heavenly Venerate Yiqiong wasn't Immortal King Tu-gong's most trusted Heavenly Venerate, and if he didn't steal the divine cultivation mirror, how could this legend have spread in the celestial realm? If it weren't for this legend, how could the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion disappear from the celestial realm? Even the Palace of Law doesn't know where the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion is. I think..." Suji shook his head and said, "It's better if we don't look for it. How about we pretend that we never came here at all?" "How is that possible?" Fairy Xingyu smiled bitterly and shook her head. "From the moment we saw the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion, it was already difficult for us to escape from this strange vortex in the celestial realm. If you don't say it, I won't say it. Well, Xiaohua won't say it either. Plus, he doesn't know where this place is. Even if we return to the celestial realm, who would know that we came to the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion?" Suji said sincerely. "Suji, I believe you. I also believe that you will never tell anyone." Fairy Xingyu shook her head. "But I don't trust Xiaohua. This guy has too many secrets. I can't guarantee that after he ascends to the celestial realm, and hears the legend, he won't think of this place. Plus, I don't believe in myself. If the Palace of Law wants to know what we have done in the mortal world all these years, they won't be able to see what we have seen here." "But," Suji said earnestly, "if we start looking for it, regardless of whether we find it or not, we will be killed." "If we find it, we won't be killed," Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. "If we can't find it, we may not be punished. But if we don't find it, we may be guilty of a great crime. According to the legend, the cultivation mirror is the supreme cultivation method that can make one become a god. Whether you find it or not, it will be troublesome." Suji tried to persuade her again. He knew very well that if Fairy Xingyu found the cultivation mirror, she would definitely give it to the Celestial Master of Law. If the Celestial Master of Law wanted to keep this secret, he would have to kill Fairy Xingyu. However, if Fairy Xingyu couldn't find the cultivation mirror and any immortals knew that she had come to the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion, they would definitely suspect that Fairy Xingyu had secretly kept the cultivation mirror. The wisest thing to do was to immediately leave this place and never mention this matter again. Even if the Celestial Masters or Celestial Kings searched their souls in the future, they could still maintain their innocence. Chapter 45:16. Yes, I know. Suji nodded. He flew to a corpse and released his extended thought to examine it carefully. Fairy Xingyu always said that Xiaohua was stingy and greedy. Now it was her turn. She was much slower than Xiaohua. After a while, her celestial artifact could not hold too much. When she wanted to look for the storage celestial artifacts on the corpses, she found that most of the corpses did not have any storage celestial artifacts. Fairy Xingyu did not wait any longer. She threw away some of the low-quality celestial artifacts she had obtained earlier and put in better ones. Even so, looking at the many celestial artifacts in front of her that she could not take, Fairy Xingyu was very unhappy. Perhaps I should get Suji to collect more. Fairy Xingyu looked up at Suji, who was not far away. However, after watching for a moment, she was a little surprised. This was because Suji was observing more than taking action. He seemed to be searching for something. Eh? Suji, why don't you take these things? Fairy Xingyu was a little puzzled. What are you looking for? Suji looked up and replied, I'm not looking for anything. I just feel that these corpses seem to have been moved by someone. The storage celestial artifacts are all gone. Moreover, the armor and weapons on these corpses are all from the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion. We don't know how to refine celestial artifacts. Even if we take all these celestial artifacts, we can't use them. Instead of that, it's better to just take some as evidence. Even if you can't use them, you can take them to trade. Fairy Xingyu urged. We have been in the lower realm for so long that our cultivation can't catch up with our peers. If we don't get some elixirs and secret techniques, how can we cultivate to the celestial master level? Xingyu, Suji said, didn't you notice? Most of the corpses in the Heavenly Mansion have storage celestial artifacts. We can go back and take a few more. Ah? Fairy Xingyu blushed and said in a low voice. At that time, I was shocked and wanted to find the truth about the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion. I didn't notice this. Suji nodded and looked up at one of the corpses. He raised his hand and grabbed it. A jet-black software flew out from the corpse. He looked around and said, This is not bad. It's perfect for Xiaohua to wear. TSK. Fairy Xingyu rolled her eyes at Suji and said, He has worn it. How can I take it? The star armor's quality is average. Just give it to him. Suji responded with boredom. He was about to lower his head to search again when suddenly, several thoughts that were very similar to Yen Yen's came from afar like a gust of wind. They swept across the abyss, the corpses, and landed on Suji and Fairy Xingyu. That will was incomparably cold, filled with bloodlust and brutality. When it landed on the two of them, silver light immediately erupted. Ing Yen? Suji was the first to sense it. His expression changed drastically as he exclaimed, There's actually an immortal beast here? Fairy Xingyue's face was also pale. She moved her body and said, Of course there will be immortal beasts. But immortal beasts with telepathy, how can we resist them? Let's go. Io Xiaohua! Suji hurriedly followed Fairy Xingyue and flew into the Divine Palace. However, after flying for a while, he realized something. Xiaohua is still outside the Divine Palace. This little guy, Fairy Xingyue said angrily. Why didn't he wait in place? Why did he run? With that, the two of them moved like lightning in the direction of Xiaohua. The yin that fell on them was still like the wind, closing in on them step by step. Xiaohua was easy to find. Following the footprints he left behind earlier, Suji only flew for half a cup of tea's time before he saw the high slope filled with corpses in front of him. Xiaohua was holding a rod-shaped immortal tool that was several hundred jiang in size in his hand. He was clumsily climbing up, wanting to climb up the high slope. However, some immortal tools on the high slope were in a mess. Xiaohua accidentally fell into a huge armor. Xiaohua! Suji was both angry and amused. Before he could get close, he shouted, Come back quickly! There are immortal beasts around the Divine Palace. I'll see near. Hearing Su Ji's voice, Xiaohua hurriedly turned around and waved the immortal weapon. Look, what did I find? This immortal weapon is just right for me. Idiot! Fairy Xingyue shouted. How can you touch the immortal weapon here? Why don't you put it down quickly? Xiaohua was stunned and asked curiously. Senior, didn't you say there were immortal beasts? Wouldn't it be better for me to have one for self-defense? Why do you want me to put it down? As he spoke, Suji had already flown close. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and pointed a finger. A bolt of lightning fell on the immortal artifact, causing it to shrink abruptly. Then, he waved his sleeve and was about to take Xiaohua away. However, even though the immortal artifact in Xiaohua's hand had shrunk, it was still incomparably heavy. Su Ji's figure was pulled down, while Xiaohua's figure only flew up a few feet. Throw it away quickly! Fairy Xingyue said anxiously. The immortal beasts are coming soon. We have to hide in the divine palace quickly. If you take this immortal weapon, Su Ji can't fly quickly. No! Xiaohua refused without hesitation. He held the immortal weapon in his arms and said, Without this immortal weapon, I am powerless. With this immortal weapon, I can resist the immortal beasts. You! Who do you think you are? Fairy Xingyue was furious. She raised her hand and a ray of starlight was about to strike down. She shouted, Do you think this immortal beast is one of the 6 great sages of the 1,000 demons' sacred realm? How can you be a match for an immortal beast? Xingyue! Su Ji shouted, Go back to the divine palace first and wait at the gate. I will fly back with Xiaohua. You! Fairy Xingyue was a little flustered and exasperated. She really didn't understand why Su Ji indulged Xiaohua so much. In her eyes, Xiaohua was just a mortal. Even if he had an immortal weapon, he couldn't be a match for an immortal beast. Fairy Xingyue stomped her feet and turned around to fly away. However, she stopped again after flying 100 feet. She opened her mouth and the previous star shuttle flew out again. At this time, the star shuttle landed in the air. It was different from before. Layers of immortal spirit chi swarmed into it, and the entire star shuttle emitted a dreamy glow. In the air thousands of feet around the star shuttle, besides the immortal spirit chi, there was also a kind of frost-like cold air. Xiaohua thought that Fairy Xingyue was controlling the star shuttle to fly him and Su Ji. Unexpectedly, Fairy Xingyue raised her hand and pointed at the star shuttle. The star shuttle slowly rotated and hundreds of starlight rays emerged from the front of the star shuttle, piercing straight into the air. Fairy Xingyue turned her head and shouted, Quick, I hope we can rush back to the divine palace before the immortal beast flies over. Go! Su Ji no longer waved his sleeve. Instead, he waved his hand. A bolt of lightning descended and sealed the space around Xiaohua. Then, with a loud roar, he grabbed the immortal artifact along with Xiaohua. His figure descended and flew towards the gate of the heavenly sanctum. Flying with Xiaohua and the immortal weapon was obviously a little too much for Su Ji. Big drops of sweat rolled down Su Ji's forehead, and the silver light under the armor rushed out several times. Xiaohua was also in a dilemma. He wanted to throw the immortal weapon away several times, but when he saw the solemn faces of Su Ji and Fairy Xingyue, he knew that the immortal beast that hadn't appeared yet must be very powerful. If he didn't have this immortal weapon, he would not only be food for the immortal beast, but also a burden to the two of them. Although Su Ji was a little tired now, it was better than losing his life later. Aoo! Suddenly, a strange beast's roar sounded. When Xiaohua heard it, he couldn't help but tremble. Golden flowers appeared in front of his eyes and sparks flew in all directions from his Naiwen palace. Fairy Xingyue and Su Ji's bodies glowed with silver light at the same time, protecting them. Xiaohua was below Su Ji. He could clearly see that when the silver light appeared, traces of blood seeped out of Su Ji's body. Nimbus Immortal Beast. Nimbus Immortal Beast. Fairy Xingyue panicked. How could there be a Nimbus Immortal Beast here? Although Su Ji also showed a rare trace of panic on his face, he replied calmly, The space fragments here are different from the ones we encountered before. It's normal for immortal beasts to appear that are beyond imagination. The problem is. Fairy Xingyue urged the star shuttle and shouted. If we were at our peak strength, we might be able to defeat this Nimbus immortal beast. But now, how can we resist this Nimbus immortal beast? Divine Palace. Su Ji didn't mention the name of the Yiqiong Heavenly Palace. He only said that it was the Divine Palace path. We didn't see the Nimbus immortal beast around the Divine Palace before. This immortal beast must be afraid of the Divine Palace's restrictions. We can hide in the Divine Palace. That's the only way. Su Ji mentioned the Divine Palace again, as if to encourage Fairy Xingyue. Fairy Xingyue gritted her teeth and flew toward the gate of the Divine Palace. Xiaohua also frowned and asked in a low voice, Senior, what kind of immortal beast is this Nimbus immortal beast? Why is it so powerful? It's not appropriate to mention it now, Su Ji said lightly. When you see it, you'll naturally know. In fact, it doesn't have to be this Nimbus immortal beast. In other places outside the meteor belt, those immortal beasts are not as cruel and fierce as the Nimbus immortal beast. Ordinary cultivators are definitely no match for it. After saying that, Su Ji ignored Xiaohua and focused on flying toward the gate of the palace. Oh! Seeing the gate of the Divine Palace appear in front of her, Fairy Xingyue's face was filled with joy. Suddenly, she heard a roar coming from high up in the sky. Xiaohua looked up and saw 3 strange immortal beasts that were several hundred zhang in size flying over like shooting stars. Before they could even get close, Xiaohua felt a chill in the surroundings, and a bloody smell emerged out of nowhere. Moreover, within the space, there were some faint spots that appeared. These spots were like ferocious eyes that stared at the 3 of them. Looking at the place where the clouds were surging, the so-called Nimbus immortal beast figure was revealed. This immortal beast looked like a huge stork. There was a scarlet bulge on its head, and this bulge was covered with marks of different sizes. Around these marks, there was a boundless amount of immortal spiritual energy clustered around them. Chapter 45:17. The head of the flying dagger immortal beast was flat and slightly long, like several sickles tied together. Its long, flying sword-like beak was the blade of the sickle. The neck of the flying dagger immortal beast was extremely long, with several thick tendons entwined together. Below the neck was the body of the beast, which was covered with triangular scales. The edges of the scales were either covered with fiery red fine fur or flat feathers. Strings of sparks splashed out from within from time to time. 2 pairs of bone wings stretched out from the waist of the flying dagger immortal beast. There were very few feathers on the bone wings, only some sharp protrusions. Every protrusion had a corresponding mark. The tail of the flying dagger immortal beast was also extremely long. This tail was segmented, and as it swung, layers of mysterious crimson runes emerged from the roots and surged to the tip of the tail. The tip of the tail had some fiery red markings. The markings seemed to be on the tip of the tail, but also seemed to be in the void. It gave off an unreal feeling. As for the abdomen of the flying dagger immortal beast, the 3 sharp claws that reached into the void occasionally slashed, creating cracks in the void. Damn it! Although he had not fought with the flying dagger immortal beast yet, Xiaohua had already sensed its power. We should let the golden-winged great rock take a look at this place. If nothing goes wrong, even the first great saint of the demon clan may not be a match for this immortal beast. Senior! Xiaohua smiled bitterly. This is the rhythm of a dead man. I remember that Zhu Qing did not say that the Star Moon Palace was so terrifying back in the Bronze Pillar country. How would Zhu Qing know the details of the Star Moon Palace? Su Ji looked into the distance, still wanting to rush into the Yiqiong Heavenly Palace before the flying dagger immortal beast arrived. He only said casually, If you want to find opportunities in the Star Moon Palace, how can you not pay a price? Oh no! As he spoke, the 2 flying dagger immortal beasts in front of him suddenly accelerated and disappeared in a flash. At the same time, fiery red bubbles began to appear in the void in front of Xiaohua and the others, like boiling water. Damn it! Fairy Xingyu cursed angrily. She rubbed her hands together in a hurry. clusters of star-like mist mixed with brilliance fell into the void. Then, the rotating star shuttle suddenly exploded. Asterisk hong hong hong. Asterisk tens of thousands of star fragments rushed out of the star shuttle and fell towards the void, causing the surrounding space to collapse. At the same time, in front of the star fragment, layers of red flames surged out and enveloped an area of 100 miles. When the star shatter met the flames, it exploded everywhere. Fortunately, Fairy Xingyu was the first to react. The star shatter formed a kind of defense, blocking all the flames from reaching the crowd. However, in just a few breaths, a fierce aura rushed out from the flames in the distance. The space within hundreds of feet was extremely distorted. Then, the space cracked inch by inch like silk. Boom! With a loud bang, 3 sharp sword-like red claws stretched out, passing through the space and grabbing at Fairy Xingyue. Whoosh! Fairy Xingyue had been accumulating her strength for a long time. When she saw the sharp claws, she raised her hand without hesitation. Silver light rushed out from her body. Her saber, like a moon, cut across the sky and slashed at the 3 sharp claws. Clang! A golden sound suddenly rang out. Flames appeared on the flying dagger Immortal Beast's sharp claws. Layers of runes were split in half, and blood was faintly visible. Suddenly, with a roar, the flying dagger Immortal Beast's sharp mouth appeared in the space in front of Fairy Xingyue's chest. This sharp mouth broke through Fairy Xingyue's star moon saber at lightning speed and landed on Fairy Xingyue's heart. Be careful! Suji was shocked. Just as he was about to move his body, a fierce aura descended from the sky above his head, causing Suji's body to fall slightly. Go to the door first. Suji did not forget Xiaohua, who was under him. With a wave of his arm, Xiaohua flew out like a meteor. Suji had just thrown Xiaohua out when 3 red claws formed a triangle and covered Suji in the sky. Even if Suji wanted to help Fairy Xingyue, he could not. However, at this moment, Fairy Xingyue waved her other hand again. Her saber was like a star, drawing a star curtain in front of the beast's mouth. Boom! The beast's mouth hit the star curtain and instantly broke it. Under this huge force, Fairy Xingyue's entire body flew out like a fallen leaf. Damn it! Suji was furious. The silver light around him shone brightly. Then, with a wave of his hands, layers of thunderbolts flew out like a tide and rushed high into the sky. The thunderbolts were like a tide, but the flying dagger Immortal Beast's sharp claws were like reef rocks. When they fell, they shattered the thunderbolts. The moment the thunderbolts blocked the flying dagger Immortal Beast, a dazzling thunderbolt flashed between Suji's eyebrows. Waves of thunderbolts flashed like spikes from within. When the ripples fell into the sky, the entire sky collapsed. An aura that was close to the will of heaven and earth overflowed from the collapse. As Suji grabbed between his eyebrows, a light as bright as a star appeared in his hand. The light pierced through all the darkness, and the vast aura instantly filled the entire space fragment. This is a punishment celestial weapon! Even though Xiaohua had already slowed down in midair and was about to descend, he could still easily identify the origin of the immortal artifact in Suji's hand when the powerful aura of justice, fairness, and justice rushed past him. He could not help but groan and look up at Suji. In the light and shadow, a punishment celestial weapon that looked like a spear appeared. The spear looked like it was only 8 feet long, but the light and shadow vaguely seemed to be submerged in the void. Endless thunderbolts appeared in the spear, and thousands of thunderbolts that revealed supreme majesty overflowed on the surface of the spear. Suji held the spear, and without any hesitation, he stabbed it toward the top of his head. Where the spear landed, the entire space was pierced, and the space within 100 miles was also transparent. In this transparent space, another flying dagger Immortal Beast could be seen, and a terrifying expression appeared on its ferocious face. However, the punishment celestial weapon only pierced a few feet. Ka ka ka! A burst of ear-piercing cracking sounds came from Suji's body. The armor on Suji's body broke, and pieces of flesh burst out from the armor. Even the space between Suji's eyebrows had a bloodstain that looked like a thunderbolt. In the bloodstain, white bones could be seen. Humph! Suji coldly snorted, and his hand that was controlling the punishment celestial weapon did not stop. He did not care about the collapse of his body at all. He wanted to kill the flying dagger immortal beast before he was powerless. Unfortunately, wishes were always beautiful, and the things in the world would never change because of true feelings. The punishment celestial weapon only pierced another 10 feet before the thunderbolts around it were gradually extinguished. The soaring aura was also contained within the spear. What was special was that the spear rapidly shrank until it was less than a few inches long, and it automatically fell between Suji's eyebrows. Aogg! The flying dagger immortal beast that almost died in the punishment celestial weapon suddenly let out a roar. It didn't escape, but it charged out from the void towards Suji. Suji hurriedly waved his hand and a spear-like celestial weapon appeared in his hand. Woo! He stabbed at the flying dagger immortal beast. Suji rarely showed his skills, but this spear was amazing. Although the celestial weapon didn't have much celestial spiritual energy, it still dodged the flying dagger immortal beast's attack and stabbed into the flying dagger immortal beast's body from a strange angle. Boom! The flying dagger immortal beast roared angrily. Thousands of flames appeared on its scales and instantly wrapped around the celestial weapon. Moreover, the flying dagger immortal beast's huge tail swept up a gust of wind and hit Suji's back. Facing the flying dagger immortal beast's close-range attack, the silver light around Suji's body surged. Waves of lightning also flashed under the flying dagger immortal beast's tail. Pa pa pa! In the crisp sound, several layers of lightning were destroyed. Suji's body was also swept by the flying dagger immortal beast's tough tail and fell like a stone. Damn it! Seeing the two celestials who had just met the two flying dagger immortal beasts, and were at a disadvantage in the first exchange, Xiaohua couldn't help but curse in a low voice. He understood that the two celestials couldn't gain any advantage in close-range combat with the flying dagger immortal beasts. However, the main reason was that the two of them were in their physical bodies and not celestial spiritual bodies. They couldn't use celestial weapons and didn't even dare to use too much celestial spiritual energy. If too much celestial spiritual energy entered their bodies, not to mention fighting with the flying dagger immortal beast, even their own physical bodies would collapse first. What should we do? Xiaohua naturally wouldn't stand by and watch, even if his previous plan was exposed. He only pondered for a moment, and the space between his eyebrows also flashed with a dark green light. His figure also stopped and prepared to return to help. But at this moment, a sharp flying sword pierced through the void and directly fell on the top of Xiaohua's head. This sharp and heavy was extremely heavy. Xiaohua felt as if a huge mountain was falling from the sky. How could Xiaohua dare to be negligent? Raising his head, he saw several three corpses in thunder. He saw that in the surrounding void, one after another, green seal text rushed out and set up a lightning array within a few li. Rumble! Just as Xiaohua's lightning and thunder technique was used, the third flying dagger immortal beast had already pounced. This flying dagger immortal beast was clearly smaller than the previous two, but the power that rushed out was not something Xiaohua could withstand. The flying dagger immortal beast's 3 legs fell and the beast's mouth fell, destroying the exploding 3 corpses in thunder. Even the other green seal texts scattered in the space were destroyed by the flying dagger immortal beast's tail. Damn it! How is this possible? Xiaohua finally experienced the power of the flying dagger immortal beast. He cursed loudly. Even I am not a match for this flying dagger immortal beast. In the entire 3 continents, who can pass through this spatial fragment? Whoever comes will die. Although he cursed like this, Xiaohua's body still flashed with golden light, wanting to activate his transcendence golden body. However, as the golden light flashed, countless celestial spiritual energy madly rushed in. Xiaohua's physical body uncontrollably swelled up, while the other part produced chaotic fluctuations. The golden light flashed and disappeared. Chapter 45:18. Humph! Xiaohua was still unwilling to give up. more soul strands appeared between his eyebrows as he unleashed the bloodline power of God Shibai. Woo! The flying crane immortal beast seemed to have sensed Xiao Hua's abnormality, and swung its huge tail at him. Amidst the whistling of the wind, the soul strands were destroyed one after another. The power of the bloodline backlash was generated from Xiao Hua's body. Alas! Xiao Hua sighed. He now understood that although he could use his soul cultivation in this space, his soul cultivation strength was far inferior to that of the flying crane immortal beast. Even if he used these soul cultivation divine abilities, he would only attract the suspicion of Fairy Xingyu and Su Ji. He would not be able to change the situation of the battle. Since the power of the soul can't do anything, then I'll use the other most primitive power in this world, Xiao Hua thought as he waved the immortal weapon in his hand. Woo! It smashed towards the flying crane immortal beast. Pun! With a loud bang, the flying crane immortal beast's huge tail hit Xiao Hua's immortal weapon. Xiao Hua's body was flipped over and landed far away. However, the flying crane immortal beast's body also shook violently. Its previously unstoppable momentum was suppressed by this strike. Whoosh! Just as Xiao Hua was sent flying by the flying crane immortal beast, Fairy Xingyu and Su Ji, who were also sent flying by the flying crane immortal beast, moved as well. Before their bodies landed, they immediately shot out like flying arrows and flew towards Xiao Hua's direction. Whoosh! The phalanx immortal beast landed in the sky. It no longer needed to flap its wings, but with a flap of its 3 legs, it chased after the 2 cultivators like a shooting star. Its 2 beak-like beaks even tore through the sky and bit down on the 2 cultivators. The flying crane immortal beast's beak was so powerful that with one bite, it devoured the space within 100 feet. Naturally, Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu's bodies were also devoured. Even before their bodies arrived, the silver light on the surface of their bodies had already entered the beast's mouth. Damn it! Fairy Xingyu panicked. She raised her hand and threw out an unknown immortal artifact. Then she flicked her finger. Boom! The immortal artifact exploded in the collapsed space behind her. Although it was not refined by Fairy Xingyu and the power of the explosion was much weaker, the force of the explosion still shattered the collapsed space. However, right at this moment, the spearhawk closed its mouth and the explosion and void disappeared. When it opened its mouth again, everything was gone. This is the power of the flying crane immortal beast. Fairy Xingyu was also shocked. She thought to herself, I'm afraid that it's really as recorded in the ancient books of the Palace of Justice. Only the energy-gathering celestial has the power to win. However, while Fairy Xingyu was still in shock, she used the previous explosion and the shockwave to fly far away. What Fairy Xingyu could think of and do, Su Ji could do as well. Su Ji did not wait to land. With a wave of his hand, several thunderbolts roared and rushed out. He also moved close to the ground. At this time, Su Ji did not care about the collapse of his body. Silver light danced on the surface of his body like a flickering shadow. In the blink of an eye, he was more than 1,000 feet away. Woo! The flying crane immortal beast that attacked Su Ji swept its tail. The entire space was filled with the explosive sound of immortal spirit chi. The space was split open by the flying crane immortal beast. Su Ji didn't dare to fight anymore. He raised his hands and 2 lightning swords shot out. Although they only managed to shatter a few of the scales on the tail, Su Ji had already reversed the force from the tail. Using the ingenious method of borrowing force to counteract force, he accelerated once again. Woo! Seeing that Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu had dodged the 2 attacks and took the opportunity to escape, the 2 flying crane immortal beasts were furious. They spread their wings and rushed into the air. In a flash, they flew above the 2 people. Then, the top of the 2 flying crane immortal beasts' heads lit up. The red bulge suddenly shone brightly. Dozens of fist-sized flames flew out from this light and covered Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. When these dozens of flames fell into the air, immortal spirit chi immediately poured in. The flames suddenly turned into pillars of fire and fell with a loud bang, trying to imprison Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. Damn it! It's really like a tiger being bullied by a dog. Fairy Xingyue was really angry. Even if the flying crane immortal beasts were powerful, when had she ever been bullied to this extent by immortal beasts? She could not help but curse. The silver light around her was activated like a waterfall. The star blade and the moon blade in her hands swung out respectively. The saber light was like lightning, immediately splitting several pillars of fire. Even the star shuttle that was flying with Fairy Xingyu pierced into one of the pillars of fire and destroyed it. However, just as these pillars of fire were extinguished, a slightly cold flame seeped into Fairy Xingyue's silver light and quickly entered her body. Oh no! Fairy Xingyue was really anxious when she saw the flame invading her body. She did not care about destroying the pillars of fire anymore. She pointed her thumb at the top of her head. Poof! The brilliance of the stars and moon poured down like a spring, protecting her body. The brilliance rushed toward the flame, trying to extinguish it. Just as Fairy Xingyue was trying to save herself, the flying crane immortal beast's thick tail swept down from the void again, aiming for Fairy Xingyue's chest. Now that Fairy Xingyue was in danger, how could Suji, who only had 40% of his cultivation in the immortal world, escape? The sparks that flowed out of the flying crane immortal beast's head turned into pillars of fire that trapped Suji. Suji waved the lightning in his hand and destroyed several pillars of fire in front of him. Suddenly, he realized that the flame was like flowing water, following the lightning in his hand and invading his body. Suji did not hesitate at all. With one hand like a knife, he cut off his other hand from his body. At the same time, he opened his mouth and a thunder talisman surrounded by lightning was about to spit out. However, the flying crane immortal beast's 3 legs fell from 3 directions. Suji did not know how many of them his thunder talisman could block. At this critical moment, the cries of the flying kite immortal beasts rang out once more. 2 even larger flying kite immortal beasts descended from the sky above the blazing sky palace. Damn it! Suji and Fairy Xingyue were shrouded in the shadows of the flying crane immortal beasts. It was as if the shadow of death had fallen. Both of them were disheartened. However, just as the 2 of them looked at each other with despair in their eyes, a strange sound rang out again. Ga. Suji and Fairy Xingyue were stunned. When they looked above them again, they were ecstatic. This was because the next 2 flying crane immortal beasts' legs did not land on Suji and Fairy Xingyue, but on the backs of the first 2 flying crane immortal beasts. The 2 flying crane immortal beasts, who were determined to kill Suji and Fairy Xingyue, did not dare to kill them. They spread their wings and swung their tails high into the sky, crushing the space within a few hundred feet to meet the 6 sharp claws. The sharp claws collided with the tails. Amidst the roar, the 2 smaller flying crane immortal beasts tumbled violently in the air. The larger flying crane immortal beast showed no mercy. Its sharp claws danced and grabbed the 2 smaller flying crane immortal beasts' backs, instantly tearing off some of their scales. The 2 smaller flying crane immortal beasts also swung their claws while tumbling, waiting for an opportunity to counterattack. Damn it, this is what it means to meet a worthy opponent. You guys have a good fight. Of course, Suji and Fairy Xingyue did not think that the 2 flying crane immortal beasts had come to save them. However, at this moment, their eyes were filled with ecstasy. They looked at each other and muttered to themselves. Then, they sneaked past the pillars of fire that had not yet been extinguished, and flew toward Xiaohua. Ah wow! The 2 smaller flying crane immortal beasts were no match for the flying crane immortal beast. After a few rounds, they were already drenched in blood. One of them could not help but cry out in a low voice. While Xiaohua was sent flying by the flying crane immortal beast, the flying crane immortal beast was also blocked in midair. The flying crane immortal beast was stunned at first, then its bestial nature erupted. Its wings flapped crazily, and 3 sharp claws slammed down like rain, wanting to slap Xiaohua, this little thing, to death. Seeing that the flying crane immortal beast did not activate its flames and only used its sharp claws, Xiaohua was overjoyed. He waved his immortal weapon with both hands and used the ethereal steps. He used the sky-piercing staff technique to fight the flying crane immortal beast. Although Xiaohua was powerful now and was not restricted by the 9 levels of essence force of the 3 continents in this space fragment, he could not be compared to the essence-gathering immortal that Fairy Xingyu had imagined. After fighting with the flying crane immortal beast's sharp claws for a while, he already felt weak and numb. The flying crane immortal beast took advantage of the chaos, and swung its claws at Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua's body, which was incomparably tough in the Thousand Demons' sacred realm, was as weak as mud under the flying crane immortal beast's claws. Several bloody marks instantly appeared. While Xiaohua was greatly shocked, his figure swayed, and he just dodged the sharp claws when the flying crane immortal beast roared and opened its mouth. The space above Xiaohua's head was swallowed up, and an extremely powerful suction force enveloped Xiaohua along with the ground. Seeing that the ground nearby was about to be torn apart, some corpses on the ground were being sucked in, and even some immortal weapons were being swallowed by the flying crane immortal beast. Xiaohua was quick-witted. He waved the immortal weapon in his hand and picked up the armor, immortal weapons, and other items within a radius of several hundred feet. He swept them into the flying crane immortal beast's mouth, and used the momentum to escape into the distance. Boom boom! The flying crane immortal beast's suction force was very powerful. The armor and other items that fell into the beast's mouth all exploded. However, the explosions were like fireworks, and even though Xiaohua tried his best to escape, he still couldn't escape the range of the flying crane immortal beast's suction force. Bang! 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 Xiaohua's face went pale, and in his panic, he circulated his soul technique once more, causing string after string of 3 corpsine lightning to appear behind him. Unfortunately, even an immortal artifact was unable to cause any waves in the mouth of the Skyhawk, so what effect could these top-grade Dharma techniques of the cultivation world have? The 3 corpsine lightning only stopped the flying crane immortal beast for a moment before the beast's mouth came down again. What made Xiaohua most sullen was that one of the flying crane immortal beast's claws had reached his back at some point. Rip! Not only did it tear apart Xiaohua's star armor and Taoist robe, it also knocked Xiaohua to the ground. His body rolled on the ground, and the Grand Ascension stage human race's face was completely swept away. Chapter 45:19. At this point, Xiaohua could no longer consider hiding anything. His mind was about to enter the space, ready to summon Taoist Witch, Celestial Being, and the others to fight. It was also at this moment. Rumble! Huge thunderbolts surged over like a flood. Swish, swish, swish. After the thunderbolts, the light pillars of stars and moons also crazily bombarded. The pillars of lightning, starlight, and moonlight all entered the mouth of the flying crane immortal beast, temporarily dispersing the enormous devouring power. Roar! The flying phalanx immortal beast was furious. It raised its head and let out a long howl. Its angry gaze shifted away from Xiaohua's body, which was rolling like a pellet, and looked behind it. In the sky, Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu had quietly arrived. They each used their immortal spiritual power to save Xiaohua. The flying crane immortal beast spread its wings, and the entire space was filled with crimson flames. The bulge on its forehead was also flashing with brilliance. Fairy Xingyu secretly complained, while Su Ji roared, "Xingyu, you and I split up. I will lead the flying crane immortal beast to another place. You take Xiaohua and rush into the Heaven's Palace." Fairy Xingyu gritted her teeth and said, "All right, be careful." Just as Su Ji was about to fly up, another anxious roar came from behind Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. The flying crane immortal beast that was pouncing towards Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu was startled and looked up into the distance. Su Ji saw this and hurriedly descended, quietly hiding beside a corpse. Fairy Xingyu also slowly descended. Sure enough, before Fairy Xingyu could hide herself, the flying crane immortal beast roared and flapped its wings, flying towards the battle in the distance. "Let's go!" Su Ji saw that the flying crane immortal beast had just flown away, and his figure immediately moved, rushing towards Xiaohua like a wisp of smoke. At this moment, Xiaohua was in an extremely sorry state. The bronze-colored skin on his back was exposed. streaks of blood seemed to be facing outwards. Although there was no blood seeping out, the wounds were slowly wriggling and couldn't heal very quickly. Looking at Xiaohua's body, he was stained with some mud. Although he was holding an immortal artifact in his hand, his arm was still slightly trembling. Clearly, he had used too much strength. Su Ji flew over his head, and without even looking at him, he grabbed him with his big hand. His figure fell rapidly again, and his flying speed also decreased. Damn it, what do I need that piece of junk for? Fairy Xingyu, who had originally been following Su Ji, overtook him all of a sudden. She looked at the immortal weapon Xiaohua was talking about and said in a low voice, "Even if you have it, you are no match for the winged crane immortal beast." "Big sister." Xiaohua laughed bitterly and said, "With this, I might not be able to defeat the flying crane immortal beast, but I can at least preserve my life. If you don't have it, you can only collect my corpse. Quick!" Su Ji had been paying attention to what was behind him. At this moment, he urged loudly, "Xingyue, don't say any more. The flying crane immortal beast has already noticed that we have left." Hearing this, Fairy Xingyu naturally turned her head back. Sure enough, with the addition of the last Nimbus immortal beast, the situation of the battle immediately became complicated. In just a moment, the two larger Nimbus immortal beasts were also injured by the three Nimbus immortal beasts. They had no choice but to slow down their attacks. Now that the battle had slowed down, the phalanx immortal beasts thought of their prey and looked at Su Ji and the others. "I'll help you." Fairy Xingyu did not dare to be negligent. She raised her hand and waved it, and a huge hand of stars and moon fell. Together with Su Ji, she grabbed Xiaohua and rushed to the gate of the Heaven's Mansion with Xiaohua. Ah well! Seeing that their prey was escaping, the two larger Nimbus immortal beasts spread their wings and pounced at Su Ji and the others with a roar. Boom! Unfortunately, before they could fly more than 300 meters, the three smaller Nimbus immortal beasts were even faster. They fell from the top of the two Nimbus immortal beasts' heads and smashed their tails mercilessly on the necks of the two Nimbus immortal beasts. The two Nimbus immortal beasts were furious. They curled their tails and stretched out their sharp claws again. Caw caw caw! With an ear-piercing sound, another Nimbus immortal beast's scales were torn and fell. In an instant, the 5 Nimbus immortal beasts were fighting again. Phew! Xiaohua was taken to the gate of the Heaven's Mansion by the two immortals. When he turned around and saw the 5 Nimbus immortal beasts fighting, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. He could not help but cry out, "Damn it, this kind of space fragment! No cultivator on the 3 continents can walk out alive, right?" "Of course," Fairy Xingyu sneered. "Even we have to suffer under the sharp claws of the Nimbus immortal beasts. How can others leave alive?" Su Ji also said with lingering fear. "I guess this is also the reason why the Star Moon Palace disappeared from the 3 continents." Fairy Xingyu nodded. "I was also surprised earlier. Since the 3 continents have tokens to enter and exit the Star Moon Palace, there is no reason why there is no news about the Star Moon Palace. I guess the cultivators who entered the Star Moon Palace in the past were unlucky enough to encounter these Nimbus immortal beasts. Or maybe there are other Nimbus immortal beasts that are even more powerful. They were all wiped out here, leaving no clues behind. Oh no! Quick!" She had only said a few words when the battle between the 5 Nimbus immortal beasts came to an end. Another Nimbus immortal beast rushed out of the battle and pounced on Su Ji and the others. At this time, Su Ji and the others were only a few hundred meters away from the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion. "Let's fight!" Su Ji roared and the silver light around him shone brightly. Fairy Xingyu was anxious and shouted, "Su Ji, don't!" Before she could finish speaking, lightning flashed under Su Ji's feet and pieces of flesh and blood dripped down. His flying speed increased greatly as he carried Xiaohua. Seeing that Su Ji's fight was to speed up, Fairy Xingyu finally heaved a sigh of relief. She also hurriedly urged the remaining immortal chi to speed up. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Even Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu were not as fast as the Nimbus immortal beasts, let alone Xiaohua, who was carrying a heavy object. The three of them had only flown a few hundred meters. When they were halfway there, the Nimbus Immortal beasts had already caught up. This time, the two groups of Nimbus Immortal beasts had a tacit understanding. Two of the larger Nimbus Immortal beasts rushed towards Su Ji, while the three Nimbus Immortal beasts that came first pounced on Fairy Xingyu. Xiaohua was already regarded as an easy prey. Seeing that the five Nimbus Immortal beasts were waving their sharp claws at Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu's heads, Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly shouted, "Leave me behind, run away from the palace gate, and run in the opposite direction." Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu were stunned and immediately understood. They looked at each other and urged their immortal qi on their arms at the same time. They threw Xiaohua toward the palace gate, turned around, and rushed into the distance. Seeing that the three of them had separated, the five Nimbus Immortal beasts were obviously stunned. However, they did not have much time to think about it. Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu sped up. Just as one of the Nimbus Immortal beasts was about to pounce on Xiaohua, the other two Nimbus Immortal beasts roared and stopped the Nimbus Immortal beasts from splitting up. As a result, the five Nimbus Immortal beasts turned their wings and flew towards Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. Xiaohua's figure landed on the ground without a trace of stagnation. He flew toward the gate of the heaven's abode like flowing water. It was only a distance of a few hundred meters. In the past, he could cover it with just a few steps. Now, it was a matter of life and death. Boom! Xiaohua had just flown halfway when he heard a roar behind him. Xiaohua panicked. Damn it, aren't these Nimbus Immortal beasts too powerful? Sure enough, when he looked back, Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu were already tumbling in the air and flying toward the palace gate. At this time, Xiaohua himself had not reached the palace gate. Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu heard Xiaohua's words and immediately came to their senses. They threw Xiaohua aside and flew in the opposite direction of the palace gate. After flying for a while, the five Nimbus Immortal beasts had already flown above their heads and their sharp claws slammed down. At this time, Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu had a tacit understanding and swapped their positions. The exchange between the two of them was easy, but the attack of the five Nimbus Immortal beasts was not easy to distinguish. Ka ka ka! The wings of the two groups of Nimbus Immortal beasts collided almost at the same time. In an instant, the five Nimbus Immortal beasts pounced on each other again. Of course, this time, the Nimbus Immortal beasts had learned their lesson. After swapping positions, they split up again and swung their tails at Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu had quietly retreated a little when the Nimbus Immortal beasts were fighting. When they saw the huge tails sweeping toward them, they were overjoyed and activated their immortal artifacts to block them. Boom boom! Two loud sounds rang out in succession. Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu were sent flying by the huge tails. Wasn't the direction of the Heaven's Abode Palace Gate? Damn it! Although the two immortals seemed to be in a sorry state, they were about to crash into the Heaven's Abode like meteors. Xiaohua was still thousands of feet away from the Heaven's Abode Palace. Then, he rolled his eyes and raised his hand to pick up the immortal artifact. He pushed against the ground and exerted force in his hand. Woo! His whole body flew straight for more than 100 feet and landed on the ground. Then, Xiaohua stumbled and ran for a few more feet. Once again, he pushed against the ground and his body flew again. After a few more times, and with Xiaohua's secret soul cultivation flying technique, he managed to chase Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu back. Rise! Seeing Xiaohua push himself up again, Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu understood. They stretched out their hands at the same time and grabbed Xiaohua's body with their immortal qi. Then, the three of them rushed through the gate of the Heaven's Abode Palace. At this time, the sharp claws of the flying crane immortal beast had already fallen. With a swoosh, Xiaohua's back was torn apart again. Woo! The three of them fell into the gate of the Heaven's Abode Palace. Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu let go of Xiaohua at the same time. Xiaohua's body drew an arc in the air and landed on the ground of the main hall. Amidst the whistling of the wind, there was a series of clattering sounds. Xiaohua's slightly clumsy body smashed the corpses on the ground into a mess. Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu also staggered to the ground. Not only were their faces abnormally pale, but there were also some drops of sweat dripping from their foreheads and necks. Fairy Xingyu stood on the ground and wiped her forehead with her hand. Looking at the sweat, she smiled bitterly and said, "Is this sweat? I can't remember the last time I sweated." Chapter 45-20. Su Ji ignored Fairy Xingyu. He released his thought extending and scanned the ground. When his thought extending landed on a corpse, he hurried over and picked up a box-like fairy weapon from the corpse. As his thought extending passed, he took out a thumb-sized elixir. However, he just looked at it, then threw it on the ground and said, "Although these elixirs are useful, we can't take them. What a pity! Su Ji, take this first." Fairy Xingyu smiled, took out a jade bottle, and threw it to Su Ji. Su Ji was slightly stunned. He took the jade bottle with a wry smile, took out a blue elixir, and swallowed it. Then, he sat cross-legged on the ground and adjusted his breathing. Fairy Xingyu looked at Xiaohua, took out another jade bottle and swallowed it. Then, she looked at Xiaohua and asked, "Xiaohua, these elixirs I refined are not suitable for you. Your injuries seem to be superficial. As long as you get out of this space fragment, you should be able to heal yourself, right?" "Senior, you're right." Xiaohua nodded. "I don't need to waste elixirs. This junior will stand guard for the seniors." "No need. It's safe in the Heaven Mansion now," Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. "Those Nimbus Immortal beasts don't dare to enter. You should rest for a while. We'll discuss." Unfortunately, before Fairy Xingyu could finish speaking, another roar of the Nimbus Immortal beast came from outside the door. Then, a gust of wind and flames rushed in from outside the door. The smaller Nimbus Immortal beast was the first to rush in. "How is that possible?" Startled, Fairy Xingyu had cried out. "If these flying jade immortal beasts could rush into the Heaven Mansion, the Heaven Mansion would have been in a mess. Now, there are no traces of the Nimbus Immortal beasts coming in and out of the Heaven Mansion. They obviously don't dare to come in. Maybe they couldn't before." Su Ji suddenly opened his eyes, glanced at the Nimbus Immortal beasts rushing in, and said, "They didn't even dare to get close to the Heaven Mansion. No. I'm afraid they don't have any scruples. The Heaven Mansion is going to suffer." Hiss. Although Su Ji said Yiqiong Heavenly Prefecture, Fairy Xingyu knew what he meant. When the three of them arrived at the Yiqiong Heavenly Prefecture, the entire Heavenly Prefecture did not show any signs of being destroyed by the flying crane immortal beast. Clearly, the aura of the corpses of the two celestial venerables had forced them to stay away. Now that they had collected the corpses of the two celestial venerables, the aura of the two celestial venerables had disappeared. Naturally, the phalanx immortal beasts could approach the immortal mansion without fear. Although there was a restriction around the immortal mansion, it was limited to the surroundings. They didn't know how to activate the restriction in front of the door, so the phalanx immortal beasts could enter the immortal mansion. Mother Asterisk Cur. Even this so-called heavenly abode can't stop the flying kite immortal beast. Are we all going to die here? This shard of the celestial realm is really killing me. Xiaohua was even more shocked, and he cursed furiously in his heart. But he didn't dare dally, and he waved his immortal artifact to greet them while he said, "Senior, quickly heal your injuries. I'll obstruct them for a while. Get out of the way." How could Su Ji still care about healing? He hurriedly got up and shouted, "Xiaohua, you're no match for them." As he spoke, Su Ji raised his hand and grabbed. A shadow condensed from lightning had already passed through his hand and landed on the flying kite immortal beast. Whoosh! How could the flying kite immortal beast be afraid of this shadow? It opened its mouth and spat out a crimson pillar of fire, which collided with the palmed shadow. With a boom, the pillar of fire was annihilated, and the shadow also disappeared. That powerful airflow almost flipped Xiaohua over. Ah wow! At this time, behind the flying kite immortal beast, another flying kite immortal beast was obviously bigger. It seemed to be another group. Xingyue. Su Ji raised his head and looked around, then shouted, "Let's split up and rush into the heavenly abode to see if there's a restriction to avoid the flying kite immortal beast." Okay. Fairy Xingyue hesitated for a moment, then her figure flashed and flew in another direction. "Senior!" Seeing that Su Ji was coming to save him, Xiaohua hurriedly shouted, "Although I don't have any magic power, I know the art of fighting. The main hall of the heavenly abode is not like the outside. There are pillars, corridors, and other obstacles. Although the flying kite immortal beast is powerful, it may not be able to do anything to me. Senior, you'd better hurry to the depths of the heavenly abode to find a way to kill the flying kite immortal beast. Now, there are only 5 flying kite immortal beasts. We can still deal with them. If a few more come, we'll really die without a burial place." As he spoke, Xiaohua waved his celestial artifact again, and his figure jumped into the distance. His figure was quite agile, and he was hiding behind a huge pillar. Ah well! At this time, the flying kite immortal beast had already stretched out its sharp claws to grab Su Ji. The other flying kite immortal beast flapped its wings and flew toward Fairy Xingyue. "Okay." Su Ji thought for a moment, then quickly retreated and shouted, "Be careful! I remember that there is a smaller hall in the depths of the heavenly abode. Go in and hide first." Crack! Just as Su Ji finished speaking, the flying kite immortal beast's sharp claws had already clawed down. As Su Ji dodged, the floor of the main hall was already cracked by the flying kite immortal beast's claws. Su Ji looked at the entrance of the hall again, and then he flicked his finger, causing a ball of lightning to shoot out. Rumble! A huge tremor resounded, and it drew the attention of the flying crane immortal beast that was charging over from Xiaohua, and then it urged its figure to charge towards the other side of the hall. Seeing that Su Ji and Fairy Xingyue had lured the 3 flying kite immortal beasts away, Xiaohua did not dare to be negligent. With a sweep of his mind, he put his celestial artifact into the space, and then used his soul cultivation flying technique to fly in another direction. As Xiaohua flew, he muttered in his heart, "Seniors, don't blame me for hiding it. This is a matter of life and death. If I reveal a bit of my divine ability in front of you, I will be hunted down even if I ascend to the immortal world in the future." Just as Xiaohua approached a huge pillar, his body fell rapidly and landed on the ground. Then, he activated his soul power, and his entire body slowly straightened and changed into a square shape. This was the transformation technique that Xiaohua had comprehended from Qingqiu Mountain in the star-picking deck. Although this soul power was not as useful as Dao's secdermic powers, Xiaohua's human appearance still changed a little. Xiaohua had just landed when the flying kite immortal beast's cries rang out behind the stone pillar. The last 2 flying kite immortal beasts also rushed into the main hall. One of them chased after Fairy Xingyue, while the other pounced on Xiaohua. However, after the flying kite immortal beast landed, Xiaohua's shadow was nowhere to be seen. The flying kite immortal beast's 3 legs moved step by step beside the huge pillar, and a powerful responding force swept across the ground inch by inch. The loud footsteps caused the entire hall to shake. "Damn it!" Xiaohua retracted his aura, leaving only a wisp of his consciousness outside. However, this wisp of consciousness swayed like withered grass in front of the valiant Ing Yen. Xiaohua could not help but curse angrily again. "This young master has always been extremely lucky. Why is it that after arriving at the Star Moon Palace, my luck has become a complete mess?" As if it had discovered something, the flying crane immortal beast approached the huge pillar with large strides. Its beak that was as hard as a crane's beak also slowly approached Xiaohua. An extremely fishy smell that carried an indescribable heat pressed towards Xiaohua. Admittedly, Xiaohua had already transformed and sealed off his 5 senses. However, the aura that was mixed with the echoing will still forced its way into Xiaohua's mind, mouth, and nose in waves. A feeling of being targeted involuntarily arose from the bottom of Xiaohua's heart. In an instant, Xiaohua felt a sense of regret. He had been too smart for his own good. If he had escaped earlier, the flying kite immortal beast would only have chased after him. At this moment, he was completely exposed to the flying kite Immortal Beast's attack range. If the flying kite Immortal Beast sensed that something was wrong and immediately attacked, it would be too late even if he summoned Taoist Witch, Celestial Being, and the others from the space. PFFF. At this moment, the flying kite Immortal Beast's sharp beak landed on Xiaohua's back. The heat almost melted Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua clenched his teeth and tried his best to endure the unspeakable pain. Fortunately, the flying kite Immortal Beast was only suspicious. After probing for a moment, its sharp beak left again. Boom! It landed on the corpse of an immortal general not far away and shattered the armor. The immortal general's corpse also turned into nothingness in a ball of crimson fire. Ah wow! The flying kite Immortal Beast took a few steps forward. As if it was angry, it roared at the sky and swept its tail horizontally. Boom! It hit the huge pillar. The pillar shook a few times, but it didn't fall. Boom, boom, boom! The flying kite Immortal Beast seemed to be venting its anger. It slammed into the pillar several times. Boom! The entire pillar finally collapsed. The roof of the palace that was already tilted fell again. Crash! The huge rocks engraved with runes had lost their restrictive power. They fell one after another like rain. They hit Xiaohua and the flying kite Immortal Beast. Immediately after, the flying kite Immortal Beast let out a few hurried cries as if it was very happy. It spread its wings and flew in another direction. In just a short moment, the entire hall returned to a state of tranquility that had lasted for countless years. However, Xiaohua didn't move. He also didn't release his soul remembrance, or consciousness. He was waiting for the flying kite Immortal Beast to return. After half a cup of tea's time, the entire palace didn't have any abnormalities. Xiaohua released his soul remembrance, and looked for a moment. Then, he raised his hand and pushed away the rocks that fell on him. Then, he didn't even look and flew into the distance. After flying past a few palaces, there were no more sounds. Xiaohua stopped again. He looked around and found a platform to sit down. He thought to himself, "Damn it, it's too dangerous. The immortal realm is indeed not a place for people to stay. Right now, not to mention sneaking into the immortal realm through the passage of the Star Moon Palace, even if the immortal realm's heavenly venerables invited me with 8 palanquins, I wouldn't go. I must cultivate my strength. Through ascension, I must temper my body in the spirit cleansing pool before going. Without the immortal spirit body and immortal spirit chi, I can't even defeat an immortal beast. What's the point of going to the immortal realm?" Chapter 45-21. After resting for a while, Xiaohua looked at the mess in the hall and smiled again. Hee, I didn't dare to plunder at will outside Heaven's mansion for fear that fairy Xingyu would see through it. Now that the flying jade immortal beast has entered Heaven's mansion, I'm afraid that the entire Heaven's mansion will be ruined by these beasts. Instead of that, it's better to let me take advantage of it. Thinking of this, Xiaohua released his mind. Whether it was the corpses, armor, immortal tools, storage bags, or the things in Heaven's mansion, they were all collected into the space like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. In just a moment, the entire hall was clean as if a dog had licked it. When the hall was clean, Xiaohua took out the wishful staff, looked around, and hit a giant pillar. Boom! The shaky roof of the hall fell, raising a burst of dust. Then, Xiaohua moved again, walking toward the depths of Heaven's mansion. Wherever he went, he swept away everything, and the halls collapsed one by one. As for Xiaohua's mind, he entered the space. When the figure of Jade Archive Xiaohua appeared, the figures of Taoist Witch, Celestial Being, Demon Venerable Shi, and others also appeared. Fellow Taoists! Jade Archive Xiaohua did not delay, and told the story of the matter to his avatars. He asked straightforwardly, "The situation is so urgent, do you have any good ideas?" "Big brother," Demon Venerable Shi shouted, "I have no problem. This immortal chi conflicts with my devil chi, but I can use my means here." "Forget it." Jade Archive Xiaohua's face was black. "Once the devil blade appears, there is no need to wait for me to fly to the immortal world. Su Ji's immortal thunder will kill me. He is the punishment envoy of the punishment palace. How can he allow a cultivator with devil chi to fly to the immortal world? In that case, I can only act secretly? Taoist Witch asked faintly. Of course. Jade Archive Xiaohua replied without hesitation. Fellow Taoist is now a taboo in the immortal world. Although I don't know the reason, we'd better not touch it. I have no problem, Celestial Being said arrogantly. The immortal chi in this space fragment has no effect on me. Fellow Taoist, there's no problem. However, Jade Archive Xiaohua still shook his head and said, however, without that white bone, fellow Taoist wouldn't be a match for this bullshit immortal beast. However, if we take out white bone, Fairy Xingyue is a law envoy. She has great insight and might see through our methods. And TSK, I don't need to say more. The most precious thing in this space fragment has been taken by us. When she finds out that something is wrong, she will definitely look for me. Taoist Min smiled and said, since you can't do anything, my fellow Taoist, just keep hiding your true strength. Anyway, this heaven's abode seems to be of great importance. Su Ji and Fairy Xingyue, I don't want you to know the details. You might as well pretend to be ignorant until the end. Playing dumb is a must. Jade Archive Xiaohua nodded. The problem now is how to escape. It's not a big problem if it's just the 5 of them. Taoist Min replied. In this space fragment of the immortal realm, it seems that the power of law of the 3 continents has lost its effectiveness. Fellow Taoist, I and Heavenly Tao can resist the immortal beasts. If you use your divine ability, of course, you can resist them too. However, it's best to avoid Su Ji and Fairy Xingyue. However, if it's as you're worried, and there are more than 5 immortal beasts in this space fragment, then it'll be troublesome. We can only rely on the 2 immortals to find the place to escape from this space fragment first. Sigh, these 2 immortals are a little too arrogant. Taoist Wu sighed and said, or they have some scruples. Before entering the Star Moon Palace, they should have discussed it with you more. That's normal. Taoist Min smiled and said, didn't we come to the Star Moon Palace with Xiong Yi, Yuanya, and the others? Should we have discussed it with them? That's true. Demon Venerable Sure nodded. I'm just afraid that Fairy Xingyue is hiding something that will be disadvantageous to you. Fairy Xingyue may have selfish motives, but Su Ji won't. Jade Archive Xiaohua shook his head. As long as I'm with Su Ji, I don't have to worry about anything. The problem is that we're separated now. You have to be careful, big brother. Demon Venerable sure seemed to have a natural resistance to immortals and reminded him. I know. Jade Archive Xiaohua nodded. You wait for a while to discuss. I'll go out first. After saying that, Xiaohua's mind left the space. However, after a moment, Xiaohua's mind fell on the continent where the immortal artifacts were. Then, he raised his hand and a flying fork that was nearly 100 feet long landed in his hand. This flying fork was blue in color. When it landed in Jade Archive Xiaohua's hand, it still gave off a chill. Looking at the sharp tip of the flying fork, where pieces of ice appeared out of thin air, Jade Archive Xiaohua smiled and said, this immortal artifact is of the ice attribute, which is the nemesis of the immortal beasts. We'll rely on this to kill the immortal beasts. Unfortunately, even if I use all my magic power, I'm afraid I won't be able to pierce through the scales of the immortal beasts. I can only rely on Su Ji for this. However, Su Ji's divine ability hasn't recovered yet, so he probably won't be able to fully activate this immortal artifact. I still have to add some materials. After thinking for a while, Jade Archive Xiaohua raised his hand and several drops of Xiantian true water floated into the air. As Jade Archive Xiaohua raised his hand and grabbed, the Xiantian true water fell into the spikes of the flying fork. After finishing his preparations, Jade Archive Xiaohua left the space again. However, he didn't bring the flying fork out of the space. He casually knocked over another stone pillar, and the entire palace collapsed. Xiaohua stepped into a collapsed palace. The roof of this palace was long gone. The broken pillars, some huge rocks, and the jade table all fell into the dust. Xiaohua looked around. His mind was like quicksilver as he put the jade table, pearls, and other things into the space. Then, he turned around and looked outside the palace. Outside the palace was an even more spacious courtyard. There were many immortal herbs and immortal trees that Xiaohua didn't recognize. Moreover, because the restrictions of the heavenly abode were damaged during the battle, these immortal trees and immortal herbs weren't protected by any restrictions at all. They looked as if they could be picked by anyone. Seeing this, Xiaohua's eyes lit up. He flew in front of a stalk of immortal grass. Just as he was about to reach out and grab it, he thought for a moment and stopped. After thinking for a bit, his mind entered the space again. When he came out, Xiaoguo also came out. Xiaoguo's body in the immortal spiritual energy was as he expected. Her spiritwood body wasn't affected by the immortal spiritual energy, and didn't have any special discomfort. Xiaohua was overjoyed and said in a low voice, "Xiaoguo, I'll leave this place too." Xiaoguo, what's wrong? Could it be that you can't stay in this space for a long time? No. Xiaoguo's small body trembled like a sieve. His red face was now as white as snow. His eyes flickered with extreme fear as he looked at the top of Xiaohua's head behind his back, stuttering as he spoke. Seeing this, Xiaohua's heart tightened even though he didn't have any warning signs in his heart. His mind wrapped around Xiaoguo, and he desperately urged his soul power. His body didn't move at all as he flew into the distance. Woo! Xiaohua's body had just moved when a gust of wind appeared behind Xiaohua. 3 scarlet-red claws of the flying crane immortal beast stretched out from the void and directly fell on Xiaohua's back. Slash! Boom! Xiaohua was indeed quick to react and left a string of afterimages in the air. However, one of the kite immortal beast's sharp claws still landed on his back. Amidst the sound, Xiaohua's back was torn apart, and his muscles were torn apart. The other 2 claws even scratched the ground and created a crack that was several meters long. At this moment, the kite immortal beast that was hidden in the void finally revealed itself and landed heavily on the ground. Damn it! Xiaohua narrowly escaped a calamity. The sharp pain in his back pierced his heart. He angrily cursed. He knew in his heart that it was definitely him who pushed down the palace and attracted the flying crane immortal beast's attention. The flying crane immortal beast was lying in ambush in the void in advance, waiting for him to fall into its trap. If he didn't see the courtyard filled with immortal herbs and had the sudden idea to come out from the collapsed palace, he would have already been killed by the flying crane immortal beast. Looking at the flying crane immortal beast again, after its attack missed, it swept its huge tail again. At the same time, several immortal trees were broken and the space was torn apart. Xiaohua didn't have time to put Xiaoguo into the space. He casually threw her to the ground and clenched his fists. Woo! He faced the flying crane immortal beast head-on. Poo-pee-you! First, there were 2 muffled sounds. Xiaohua's fists had hit the flying crane immortal beast's tail. At the same time, boom boom boom! A series of explosions sounded. Xiaohua's body was hit by the flying crane immortal beast's tail and flew horizontally like a meteor. In an instant he pierced through more than 10 stone walls and disappeared after raising a cloud of dust. Ayo! The flying crane immortal beast roared loudly. It seemed to be excited. It flapped its wings and its huge body also moved. It followed Xiaohua's direction and pounced. Everywhere the flying crane immortal beast passed, more than 10 stone walls were completely destroyed by the flying crane immortal beast. That continuous palace once again collapsed with a loud bang. Whoosh! Not only that, the flying crane immortal beast rushed out 100 feet and opened its mouth again. A crimson pillar of fire shot out from the cave that Xiaohua had pierced through. The stone walls and pillars all melted and disappeared in this pillar of fire. Roar! While the flying crane immortal beast was frantically attacking, it heard Xiaohua's roar. Suddenly, he rushed out from behind a stone pillar and waved the wishful steel staff in his hand. Boom! It smashed into the flying crane immortal beast's claws. In the huge roar, The flying crane Immortal beast's claws trembled slightly. A layer of marks on it suddenly flashed with red light. A great impact force was generated. Not only did it block Xiaohua's wishful steel staff, but the remaining force was not exhausted. Xiaohua's figure was sent flying upside down in midair. Shua! The flying crane Immortal beast waved its claws very fiercely. Without waiting for Xiaohua to fly more than 10 feet, it hit Xiaohua's chest again. Xiaohua's body collapsed and his whole figure was once again sent flying like gravel. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.